This study of the Independent School District 535 School Board is called to order at 5:06 p.m. on Tuesday, July 23rd, 2019, in room 137 of the Edison Building. Present at the board table is Mr. Michael Munoz, Superintendent of Schools, and a non-voting ex officio member of the board. Also present is Ms. Wendy Edgar, the Assistant Board Clerk. Ms. Edgar, would you please call the roll?
Ms. Amundson?
Here.
Chair Barlow?
Here.
Ms. Marvin?
Here.
Ms. Nathan?
Here.
Mr. Slusner? Ms. Seelinger?
Here.
Ms. Workman?
Here.
Let's stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. (2.01) Approval of agenda. Mr. Munoz, will there be any changes to the agenda?
No changes.
Move approval. Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
7.02. So even though we said there are no changes, there actually are because we're suspending the order, but we're flexible enough. We got this, right?
No, this is study session, it's not a sport.
Okay.
We're fine.
7.01, evaluation tools framework informational item. Before the subcommittee presents, I wanted to thank you guys for undertaking this effort. Directors Nathan, Seelinger, and Marvin, and we're excited aren't we, to review the tool and to have the discussions that will follow. So I will defer to the subcommittee and allow you guys to present your work.
Well, and I'm guessing one of the other two members will do a better job of presenting it, but two things I wanted to say. First of all, this is absolutely a draft. It is a draft for discussion. I have three things to say. Secondly, it is very clear that the superintendent contractually has input in what the evaluation tool will involve, and we have not given him that opportunity yet. So hopefully today will be the time when he can say, yeah, but this is what I would prefer, and this is, because that's really, really important. And the third thing, as we're looking through this tool, when we were discussing the process, it occurred to all of us that I'm not sure if it's the most important thing, but it's very important that when we do the evaluation, when at the end of the day we have that discussion and report back to the superintendent, regardless of the tool, we have to do a better job of coming to consensus about what we mean, what we want, and communicating it to the superintendent, because even the most perfect tool isn't going to be effective unless we can give him a clear message. So, Director Seelinger and Nathan?
So we didn't discuss this beforehand, so subcommittee, this is what we're doing.
Okay.
Wink, wink. I thought I would just talk a little bit about our process that we used as a subcommittee, and then Kathy put together the PowerPoint, which is, I thought I could do that, you could do that, and we could go from there. Sound good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So pretty straightforward, not a lot of information. So we met and kind of talked over the big picture and talked about the feedback that we had gotten at the last meeting, that study session. We looked at the standards. I used the word in my notes, rated. We didn't really rate the standards again, but kind of looked through them together and talked through them a little bit. And then kind of took an overview that we were going to look at 3 standards from the list with 2 elements each. And that was sort of the launching point, I guess, from where we started, using the MSBA handbook as a template starting place. And so then we split that work into 3, and we each took one of those goals. So as you see in the draft, we have 3 goals, and then suggested some evidence pieces, and then did a little bit of editing between us, not a lot. But then, as Jean said, I think the most important thing is that this is just a draft, and so if we were to come before you and you all said, this is absolutely not what we thought this was going to be, this is not what we wanted, we would say, okay, well, we'll take in that feedback and go back. So, that was sort of our process. I don't know if you guys have anything else to add about that. Pretty straightforward.
If I may, are there presently time parameters we're operating under based on either contract language and or what we have verbally said to the superintendent?
In terms of developing the tool?
Right.
Right. So we talked about, originally we had talked about having this study session really focusing in and getting consensus on the tool and the tool language, I would say. Then we had looked at setting aside the August study session as sort of circling back to the goal portion. Now, based on how tonight's discussion goes, I think we'll see what our next step is on the August 27th study session and how much we need to finish. I mean, it could be that everybody looks at this and gives us a big thumbs up and we're all like, great. Or we could say we have some more work to do and then we'll make another iteration. We'll kind of see where it lands. Is that okay for flexibility's sake, that we don't say, yes, we're absolutely going to walk out of here with a done tool, or we're not?
And I just want to make sure that as a board, we're in agreement. Don't want to, after the fact, recall differently, but I think Deborah accurately captured what we agreed to, and we're pointed, the ship is headed in the right direction. Okay. Director Workman, did you?
No, I
Okay.
have no question.
And Deborah, as you had said, I think that's important when you see here, and here, standard 7, for instance, or element 7A, element 7, whatever. Those don't mean anything outside of this. So that's just the way that this template categorizes things.
And to ground us a little bit more in the foundations of the tool. So if you remember this chart from last time from MSBA, and I just wanted to ground us in where we were on this chart. So we are on the bottom 2 boxes to the left, establishing the superintendent goals, and from that, the superintendent evaluation piece. We also understood from our board chair that an additional task we'll be tackling soon is the boxes on the right, which is to establish the school board goals and our self-evaluation. So learning from this process to help us to evaluate ourselves. So from the foundation of MSBA's evaluation process are these elements of what should be included in the comprehensive superintendent evaluation. So personal professional development and performance improvement of the superintendent, making sure the criteria is legal, realistic, accurate, useful, and measurable. Evaluation is ongoing and connected to the goals, both for the superintendent and the district. Links to the academic, social, and emotional growth of the students, and focusing on the importance of superintendent leadership to the success of our district and our students. So as this structure is outlined, there are 3 steps in a comprehensive evaluation. 1 is establishing the goals and standards. Step 2 is the mid-year evaluation, and step 3 is the end-of-year evaluation. And Don, you asked where we were and the timelines for that. So we're here in the yellow, where we're establishing the goals and standards and finalizing the instrument. And as Deborah said, according to the contract, our deadline to do that is the end of August. And we've allowed ourselves these 2 meetings. But I wanted to put the other 2 steps in context for all of our timelines. So according to the contract language we approved as a board, we needed to finish this mid-year evaluation process by the end of January of next year. And the evaluation process from MSBA outlined some steps for that are related to this tool. And then the end of the year evaluation needs to be finished by the end of June.
Okay, Director Workman.
Yeah, I have a question. I thought
It's just a question of semantics. Mid-year evaluation, is it really an evaluation? I thought it was more of a, I think Jean, you used the word conversation or kind of touching base. Is it, Mike, what did you understand?
What's that?
For step two, it's labeled as a mid-year evaluation, but it's, I thought it was less formal than.
Progress on the goals is
It's
what I
more
understood it to be,
progress,
right?
So
So,
check in.
BMSBA calls it a mid-year evaluation. We can change it to what it says in the contract language, which is, in January, the board and the superintendent will discuss the goals and reflect on the updated progress on each goal. So we can call it a mid-year
I
progress.
think the
Reflection.
reflection.
So,
I like reflection.
then I have also on step two, the question I have on prepare evaluation tool. So is the tool gonna change?
No,
So why are we preparing, I mean, it should be prepared, I thought that's what we're doing tonight.
right.
And that would be the same tool we'd use for the next 2 years.
You are absolutely
Okay.
correct. It's my error that I put such formal language in there. I think we can change that to reflection, and we can just change that to preparing for the meeting, whatever.
Okay, yep.
It was just to have that step that we were gonna look at the materials and prepare for the meeting, so.
Sure, and I appreciate that this process allows for this level of dialogue. That's what the intent. Nothing is trying to be forced or stipulated. So board members, please feel free to contribute. What we want to do ideally is kind of build consensus as we go through the process. At least we come towards the end, and then there's an array of questions that we could have addressed as we went through each aspect of the presentation. So process and timeline, are there any other considerations, concerns that?
And the other piece that I wanted to make sure we were all clear on, but also for the public, was that the reflection conversation as well as the end-of-year evaluation conversation by the board are closed sessions, but that there is a summary at the next open school board meeting.
Would you, if it's just a discussion on the progress of the goals, does that mean that can't, if it's not an evaluation, you can't do it in closed?
I guess we could check with MSBA on that, because in this process, for both the mid-year and the end-of-year, they recommend.
Then you're gonna have to call it an evaluation, and you're gonna have to formally do it,
Okay.
because I think that's the law on closed meetings. You can do it in an open meeting, but not in a closed. You could have that goals discussion in an open meeting, like a study session,
Right.
but I don't think in a
Are you
closed.
talking about the mid-year reflection conversation being in an
Yes.
open meeting?
Yes.
Okay.
So, I guess, here's the way I understand it should go. I don't really think it's a mid-year evaluation. My understanding is you would get from me an update on the progress on the goals. Not in a closed session, at a board meeting, you'd get progress. That's not, because it's an annual review.
Right.
The way I understand it was written with the amendment was you will be given an update on the progress made on those annual goals. So there's really no formal evaluation at that time. You just get an update on the progress towards the goals. So there's no need for a closed session. There's no need to report out because it's not a mid-year evaluation. It's your superintendent telling you, here's the progress we've made on goal A, B, E, and C. End of the year, you're doing an actual evaluation. It's not a mid-year, at least I didn't understand it when we were talking and when I signed the document that it was actually an evaluation mid-year. It was, you're going to get an update on the progress being made on the goals.
So one-way communication or two-way communication?
Well, you can say whatever you want in a board meeting. It's not, I wouldn't say it's one.
We could ask questions, but it's where we wouldn't give you additional direction.
You would provide feedback, but it's
Yeah.
not, well, we think January, you're here at goal A, you're here on goal B.
We
It's,
wouldn't rate you.
you're getting an update. So it's really not an evaluation. Is there conversation? Yes, there should be conversation.
And that
It's
would-
kind of like the old, whatever the district used to do. I mean, your superintendent tells you, and if the feedback you're getting isn't accomplishing what you think it is, then you give feedback that that's not what we meant when we said goal A or whatever. I guess, I don't have the contract amendment with me, but I don't know if it actually said a mid-year evaluation. If it did, then that's my mistake. I probably wouldn't have signed it if it was
As
that.
Mike was describing, I think one of the important pieces of that was if you had any questions about, is this what the board is expecting of me after I've been doing this, then we can say yes or no, rather than saying, waiting until the very end of the year and say, oh, you have, doggone it, Mike, you should have done X, Y, and Z, and you didn't.
And the exact language is, in January, the board and superintendent will discuss the goals and reflect on the updated progress on each goal. So no formal measurement, no
Closed session.
where you stand on the progress steps, the measurement steps. It's just to reflect that that's less formal than the MSBA process. We chose to do more of a reflective discussion, but it is two-way, right? Mike, you're gonna give us some updates and we're gonna give you some feedback. Is that something that we would do in writing? Or, like, what's the process?
I guess, Kathy, I'll be honest with you, I think you're making this much formal than I anticipated. The conversation I heard, it was not like you're describing it. It was a giving update at a public board meeting. We could talk about it, but for formal written, I guess.
I'm not describing, I want to be clear, I'm not describing it that way.
Yeah.
I'm distinguishing it between what I read about and learned about in MSBA and what we chose, which was a discussion and a reflection. I'm just trying to understand if it's in writing or if it's like a PowerPoint that you do at a board meeting and then we comment on it. I just want to be clear so that we know when January comes what we all agreed to.
Well, I think it would be pretty much up to Mike to choose the tool that he would want to present the information in. I mean, maybe a PowerPoint would be the most effective, maybe not. That, I don't really care how you present it. And it is a discussion, so I don't see any need to have anything written on either end. I mean, I suppose we could.
So I was recording, so for my
Yes.
needs, they're agreeing.
I mean, that's kind of the way I understood it, that it was, I mean, it's your call.
Okay.
Well, and I think it would be a really good opportunity too, to remind us, to remind the public, these are the things that we think are really important, to bring them back again. This is what we've done so far. So as we've discussed frequently, good things happen and we don't call them out enough. So talk about what, how we're moving forward, keeping those goals in mind. And then my assumption is that if we have questions, either we ask them then, or, we talk to the executive committee and say, can you talk to Mike about this at the next meeting we have?
I think one
But I
of
think
the
informal is-
examples that was used, and I don't want to put this on Eugene, but maybe it was, it's not bad, was that maybe we said, okay, Mike, you really need to focus on reading this year, and you come back and say, I'm gonna really have to pump it up with math, and we're gonna have to maybe hold back a little bit on whatever our big plans were for reading, so that he would have an opportunity maybe to modify the goal or modify some part of the goal, or how these, what are they called? What you had on the list. Evidence of performance, those kinds of things. I would hope that we would all agree, could all agree that Mike would certainly doesn't have to wait until January to bring stuff forward, but could certainly bring it up at a board meeting or in exec and saying, hey, I think we need to modify this a little bit, and here's why.
Yep.
And again, I appreciate the opportunity for input. Kathy has shared that she was using the more formal language of MSBA and wanted to allow us the opportunity to clarify which language we preferred, and we'll go by Certainly as it does relate to the mid-year reflection, programmatic update, that will be an open session. Certainly it will include, as oftentimes is the case when the superintendent presents, he's always available for us to inquire, seek further clarification, and that will be the case, I'm sure, with this as well. And so, were you ready to move to step 3, or are we pretty good to?
Good.
Can we just summarize? There was a lot of discussion. Can we just
So, mid-year reflection, we don't need to prepare, we need to schedule a meeting date before the end of January. We don't need to prepare an evaluation tool, but in preparation for the meeting, board members should probably review the existing evaluation tool, so that we're reminded of what the goals and the standards were. We'll hold the meeting, and at the meeting, there'll be some sort of presentation by the superintendent, some sort of discussion by the school board with perhaps some follow-up questions if those are necessary. And that will be an open meeting agenda item.
When you say review education tool,
Evaluation.
or evaluation tool, it almost sounds like we're gonna do a review of the evaluation tool at the board meeting.
No, she's just saying, do your homework.
Do your
before you-
homework.
Well,
So I don't know what you want to say.
And prepare for the meeting, but all these other things are more directly related to the meeting. I just don't want anybody in the public not understanding why we didn't review that education tool at the meeting, because that's not the intent of it. I
Okay.
mean, do we really need to put in there board members need to be prepared for this and do their homework? I mean, it's fine with me if it's in there, but
And this is more of an inward-facing process,
Right.
not necessarily external to the.
Especially because we hadn't done it before, so I thought it was an important step to.
Well, I think I think the intent of that is that it's grounding not only the superintendent, what he's presenting, but us, what we're looking for. You know, if we look at our goals and Mike is presenting on the finance department and that's not anything to do with our goals, then we'd be like, hey, wait a minute, that doesn't work. But
Exactly.
So if we're saying present an update in whatever method chosen, I'm assuming there's going to be some sort of a document attached to it, written document. Not just, Mike has his notes on the back of an index card and, I mean, something that we can use to then track.
Write it on your hand.
Oh, on your hand, right.
Write it on your hand.
But I'm saying then, when it comes around again at the end of the year-long process, it would be nice to have some sort of documentation. I mean, like you said, I don't care if it's a PowerPoint or a,
Well, I've never done a presentation for my annual evaluation. I mean, there were times where I presented artifacts, but it wasn't at a board meeting.
okay. It's just getting too formal for you?
Well, I just don't understand the need to do a formal presentation at a board meeting on the artifacts or whatever that's used for the evaluation. I mean, I'm not aware of that happening, but.
My understanding is that it's an MSBA recommendation, correct? Is that where we're getting this?
Well, the more formal process, yes, but we're modifying that process to whatever our reflection conversation is going to be. And I think for the mid-year.
Mid-year,
Yeah.
okay, sorry, we're back at mid-year, okay.
Can I make, so I'm just using this draft, I'm not saying this is what we're doing, but just because there's something written down. So supposing it's goal 1, which is providing leadership to ensure staff have autonomy, students have engagement, and all those things. Mike could say, this is what the staff has been doing with engaging students, and this is kind of, we've seen great progress, or maybe a few specific examples along that route, and for the other things as well. I'm comfortable with it just being a conversation and not having a whole lot of stuff written down, because I can go through and review the video recording and make notes.
Mike, are you also concerned about it happening in a meeting as opposed to?
Well, I've been here 8 years, and I've never had to do a formal presentation for my evaluation. never.
And I was just
And usually,
saying-
everything's done, and you get it, we talk about it in closed session, you come out at the next public meeting and make a few statements.
It's not us, though, saying, boy, we need to rein them in.
It's a suggestion.
Evaluation of a
It's a
tool.
suggestion.
And the SBA says this is a good model, so I don't think it's us saying,
Well,
To get to Mike's point, though, at the end of the day, it's a suggestion, so yes, it
Yeah.
is us, if we go with the suggestion or not.
right, and I think this is a excellent opportunity. We are not, quote, under obligation to adopt verbatim or at all suggestions, okay, that MSBA offers. They're guidelines, and I think it's important that we view them that way and have the open discussion. I appreciate the discussion. And then we gain consensus, if you will, by hearing from the board as to where we tend to land on this. And it sounds like to me, we're not voting on it, but it sounds like where we are right now, at least in terms of your initial presentation of timeline, that we're okay with being more of a non-formal, the mid-year reflection. And while we are aware of what the MSBA suggests, we are, as a local board, opting to use the language of reflection and to allow the superintendent to present and share as he has in a professional manner throughout his tenure as superintendent. I'm now thinking about, at our last MSBA conference, one of the keynote speakers spoke on and discussed the importance of and introduced the Trust Institute. You know, I think some of you may recall that, and how that is foundation for board and superintendent relationships. And that may be something as board chair, I might reach out to MSBA to see if we could maybe, learn more about that, so we can have the confidence we need in the process we utilize, as well as in the tool that we're developing, because I think we are actually moving toward a place we haven't been before, where we have a for sure tool, if you will, that doesn't hopefully change from year to year to year to year, but we're setting the tone for future evaluations and future boards. So again, I'm A-okay with taking the time to vet, if you will, language, proposal, keeping in mind Director Seelinger's opening statement was, this is not, the fix is not in, okay, this is simply a basic proposal that's been presented to accomplish the purpose it has, create active discussion. And what we'll do now, though, I'll hear from you, Director Atkinson, and then we'll probably put a pin in this point of discussion. Senator Nelson has arrived, and we'll go ahead and allow her to speak. Director
I just wanted to
Atkinson.
point out on page 4 of our bound booklet, it talks about summative and formative evaluations, mid-year formative and end-of-year summative evaluation. I think that's, a good connection to educational methods in public schools, that's the basis of the principle of teaching, is that you can't improve, you can't put everything on the end of your summative evaluation if you haven't let somebody know that, the direction is going the right direction. So I guess that's just my way of saying, not necessarily at the formal presentation, but it's good, sound educational principle to do a mid-year check-in, what we do for our students, so.
And just as a reminder, board, we have but one employee to supervise, okay? That's the superintendent. And he is open always for input during the year. Would love, I'm sure, occasional phone calls from us to inquire about direction, things you're hearing, things you're desiring. And some of us are doing that. I would encourage everyone to do that. We don't have to wait for these formal or informal processes to, state or communicate our concerns. And so, not to belabor the point, we'll be getting back to this, okay? We're not suggesting that once we kind of put a pause on this, we can't get back. I trust you guys have great memories. You'll be able to bring us right back to exactly where we were. But Senator Nelson, thank you so much for taking the time and coming and being with us today. And I think most of us know you, but...
I will say hello and maybe digitally handshake the rest, but I do think we all know one another, and I just want to thank you.
Sure.
If I could, well, first I want to thank you for your leadership. There's nothing easy about any leadership. There's nothing easy about spending taxpayer dollars, and there's nothing easy about being a director on an education board. That I have not had that position, but I can only imagine all of the information that comes at you and all of the different perspectives and the needs and the challenges that come with that. And so I just thank you for that. I do think most of us know one another, but you probably know I grew up in a home of public school educators. My dad was a high school principal for most of the time that I remember, but he was also a high school superintendent as well. My mom was a special ed teacher, elementary teacher, but also in her latter years a special education teacher. And then of course I went on into teaching myself. Interestingly enough, my dad kept saying, Carla, do not go into education. Do not go into education. I said, well, why not? I love working with kids, and it's the most important thing you can do. And he just knew that there's a good deal of challenges there, but I was very honored to teach at Holmes Elementary School, Title I, teaching there, and then at Willow Creek Middle School, I was the 8th grade reading teacher and also the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade reading specialist starting an after-school program there to help make sure our kids are ready for passing those reading tests and being great readers. So that's a little bit of my background. In fact, I was at the Boys and Girls Club today and tried to figure out, where were those classrooms? Where were those 3 classrooms that I taught in that looks very different today? And it's a real honor to represent Rochester. Just to tell you about my district, obviously we live here in Rochester. My husband Terry is with us tonight. We've raised 3 kids, all graduating from Rochester schools, 2 Mayo and 1 Century grad. So the area I represent is all of Olmsted County, border to border to border, except for that very northwest quadrant, which is like 2 townships by 2 townships. And that is Senator Senjum's district, and that includes part of the city of Rochester. And then he represents Dodge County. So that's kind of a little bit about the district. Just very briefly, I don't want to take much of your time because I know you might have questions, but you probably have a lot of other things on your plate too. But as you know, the Minnesota Senate, the Minnesota legislature operates on a 2-year budget. It's called a biennial budget. The odd years when we set the budget for the next coming 2 fiscal years. 2019, that was our job. Our constitutional job was to set that budget, and we have a balanced budget requirement in our state. I think that's a good thing for Minnesotans. It makes hard decisions, but I think it's a good thing. So our task was to develop a 2-year biennial budget, a balanced biennial budget. The fiscal year ended on June 30th, so now the state is in fiscal year 20, and the budget we passed is for fiscal year 20 and 21. Just to kind of give you a little frame of reference, the 18-19 budget, which just ended a couple of weeks ago, was for $45.8 billion. That's with a B. And when the legislature ended in May, after, I would say, we had a divided legislature, the only one in the nation. But, I think that's a good thing. It makes hard decisions, but I think it makes better decisions when you have to negotiate and work towards common agreement. And I know you folks know a lot about that. The budget that was passed was for $48.3 billion for the 2021 budget. That's about a $2 billion increase. And certainly there were significant debates at the legislature, much like you might have here. And of course, there were different perspectives on a number of issues. But working across the aisle, we were able to, I think, put together a good balanced budget that's good for Minnesota. I'll give you just a couple highlights of things that aren't education, and then maybe talk a little bit about the things that really pertain here to your jurisdiction. One of the things was the first time in about 20 years, your constituents, my constituents, will see tax relief for middle income tax filers. We also were able to get a fix on MNLARS. I'm sure you've all heard about that disastrous rollout of Minnesota licensing and registration system. I will just say that deputy registrars right here in Olmsted County had identified those problems before the rollout, and yet the decision was to roll those out. There's a fix coming for that. Something important that I know really ties into our education system as well, and I'll deal with it a little more later, but mental health support and increased services was a great need in our state. It still is, but we were able to do significant things in there. I have about a 20-page document of all the things that we did for mental health this year, and I'll talk about the education pieces in a moment. Prescription drug costs continue to escalate at very steep increases, causing a lot of problems for my constituents, probably for yours as well, and for our kids and their families. We did some steps to rein in prescription drug costs. It's a start. There's more to do. I anticipate doing more next year. Roads and bridge funding, again, we maintained significant investments there. That's how our kids get to school. That's how we all transport, goods and services transport. And then we did a crackdown on the child care assistance program fraud. There's more to do there. That's important that every one of those dollars, make sure that it's going to kids who actually need to have that child care assistance. And as you know, the Department of Health and Human Services had a big shakeup just this last week. We're still not exactly sure what happened there or is happening, but I do think that I wonder if certainly getting a hold of CCAP might be part of that, but I'm trusting that we get the folks in there who can actually make sure that all of those dollars go to the intended purpose, and I think we will. To talk about things that I know are on your agenda, let's talk about education. I can tell you it's my second year as chair of the Education Finance Committee. In 2017 and 18, I was chair of the Education Finance Committee. And now in 2019, that's been combined with the Policy Committee, and so I'm chair of the Education, Finance, and Policy Committee. That means there's been two budgets that I've been tasked with. The 2017 budget, I'm glad to say we were able to increase that all-important gold standard, really, for education funding, which is the per pupil funding. Gives you all the most flexibility in how to use those dollars. We increased that 2% in the first year of that last budget. That carried over into the next year, and then another 2% on top of that. So a 6% increase for the 2-year biennium. And we also, in that year, in 2017, you might recall Rochester was one of those handful of districts that had this compensatory pilot program. And every year, it was like 11 years, you just never knew if that money was going to come through or not. And I'm speaking now from a 2-year memory, but my memory is that it was about $8 million. And I could be corrected on that. I'm sure John will give you the right number if it's important. But what is important is that in the 2017 budget, we made those pilots permanent. And my argument was, since when does a pilot last for 11 years? And it's working. So let's make it permanent, and I'm glad to say that we were able to do that. It was an expensive piece, actually, but we were able to do that. And we also then did some funding in 2018 for safe schools. You might recall that. I would say not the best way, because it was through the bonding bill, which doesn't allow the type of discernment needed to figure out where those funds need to go. But that is one of the things that we were able to do this year. So there was about 4 big rocks that I thought that most, I think all of you, most Minnesotans, felt really needed to fit into this education budget. And so I think about, a big jar, and you think about how do you get the most in a jar? Well, first you got to put in those big rocks, and then you fill in with everything else. Well, there were 4 big rocks that there was universal agreement on in the legislature. One was the gold standard of funding, which was 2 and 2 on the formula. Now, I will tell you right up front, some had asked for 3% and 3% on the formula. That was an ask that was bigger than what the legislature could do. There were some who didn't think we should do any. I believe that getting at 2 and 2 again was a good place for us to be. That was expensive. It was over $500 million, $540 million just to get that 2% increase on the per pupil formula. And as you know, that's half of our education funding on the per pupil formula. The rest is in all those different categorical funding streams based upon the individual needs of kids, which actually makes a bit of sense, I think. Then we also, one of the other issues that we heard so much about was the increased special education cross-subsidy. And we did a little comparison, and we saw that the referendum increases that you were asking, that districts were asking for to really balance your budgets, basically, you know what it was? That, yeah, you know, because you deal with it. It was the gap in special education funding. Now the feds, when I got my special education licensure, public law 94-192, 49, I can't remember the exact public law that passed in the 70s, the feds said they were going to pay for 40% of special education funding. I don't know if they ever have.
No.
I don't think so. Thank you. Yes, it's about 7% right now, and school boards like yours were left holding the bag. And we also have seen increased costs in special education. So one of the things in the budget agreement was a significant influx of special education dollars, $90 million. The intent there is to hold down that special education cross-subsidy. Now there's still some more work to do. I know Rochester, we've had several discussions on this. There's still an issue with special education which hasn't been addressed yet with this $90 million, and that has to do with the difference between a student who leaves the resident district to go to another district for special education services, and it is that district that determines what those look like, and then the bill comes back to the resident district at about 90%. So that is going to continue to be an issue. I want you to know that we've spent a good deal of time with fiscal analysts, researchers, nonpartisan research, trying to look at what is the best way we can do here. What will happen is that bill back will go from 90% to 85 to 80% under current law. But some schools that have 90% of kids that are in special education, the resident school gets billed back the totality anyway. So we're exploring, looking at some different ways to make that more fair. And so I do understand that is a continued concern. A couple of the other big rocks then, after the formula, special education, early education. This community has been a leader in early education for as long as I can remember. I can remember Ready for K, for one. And the legislature, for the most part, understands also the importance of early learning. Brain sciences showed us that as well. And again, I just thank this community for being leaders in that. The money for 4-year-old education expired with the old budget. It was not carried over into the base. That was about $50 million. That money has been retained. It is in the same type of program that it was before, which is the voluntary pre-K program. And in addition to that, there's about $4.5 million of additional money for the scholarships program, which kids can use at voluntary pre-K or any other high-quality rated setting. And then the fourth area that was so important, that kind of those big, costly items that we just had to have, was school safety. And that's something new relatively new that school districts really didn't have to deal with before. It's a fact of life now. Last summer I was at a meeting with education chairs from all the states, many different states, and that was one of a half-a-day seminar we had on school safety, what different schools are doing, talking to security personnel, talking to leaders in Washington regarding education and school safety, and I know it's something that you take very seriously. This year, the state added $30 million to Safe Schools funding. And you know how Safe Schools funding works. There's already those prescribed ways that you can use that in your budget, and we increased that a little bit, or we expanded what those uses are so that you can also use those Safe School dollars to pay for interest on bonds, if that is something that is needed to help bring your schools into safety, into more safe settings. And of course, that money also can be used for the people inside the school, whether it be counselors or psychologists or school resource officers. So there's $30 million for that as well. And my memory is, I think that's about $33 per student. It's on the per student basis, so it's fair for every district. Those were kind of four of the huge things that were so important. And what I thought I might do is mention a few of the other things. Well, first I'll give you the numbers, which I'm guessing maybe John has already given you. But for fiscal year 2020, the state is anticipating that the Rochester School District will have 17,790 ADM, adjusted ADM. 2% on the formula brings in $2,680,717 additional dollars. Your voluntary pre-K or school readiness plus, I think we have all voluntary pre-K here, is $580,277. Now I want you to know that that isn't exactly new money, because that's money continuing what was already happening. The total year change then is $3,836,785. But again, if you're looking at a change, I would back out that VPK money. And then in fiscal year 2021, the adjusted ADM that the state is expecting for District 535 is $17,949. I am personally glad to see an increase. I go across the state and it breaks my heart. You know how difficult that is when school districts get into declining enrollment. And so I congratulate you on your good work here. And then for the 2021 fiscal year, 2 and 2 on the formula, an increase is $5,480,832. The 2021 VPK total, and again, that was something you may have been counting on before, but it wasn't continued. That is, I think that is a typo on my sheet, actually. It says it's $180,910,742. I'm gonna have to talk to John about that. I think that is a typo on my sheet. I think we're off by a decimal point. And then,
But we'll take it.
yeah, oh, I'm sorry, that's the total. Okay, that's the 2021 VPK total, which does sound right. But the piece over the voluntary pre-K that was going away was $747,149. That you, in a sense, isn't exactly new money, I don't think. But you might be interested in the special education change, which is for 2021, $1,395,244. And I think did I say the special ed change for 2020? You might want to know that number too. That's an increase of $575,791. And I'll be glad to leave this sheet with John, who probably might be the best one for keeping all those numbers. So the biennium total change is $11,460,010. So that's what new money from the education bill will be coming to the Rochester schools. The average for that special education increase is about $33 additional dollars per student in 2021, and then in 2022 it's $47 on top of that. So the total for the biennium then is $80 per student in new special education funding. And then I mentioned we'll continue for 2 years, those 4,000 public preschool seats that had expired. And so they were added in 17, been fully funded again this year. And then I mentioned the $30 million for safe schools. I want you to know that is a one-time funding. That is not ongoing funding. I believe it's very important that our schools get the resources to make them safe right now, and then as new schools are built, I'm sure that they're built with those safety features in mind. So those are just some of the big pieces that we talked about. Something else that is we continued, of course, is the facilities, long-term facilities maintenance, which we know is very important. We continued to fund that. And as, of course, you know, right down here, we had the snow days that were just historic by every sense. And so we did get the snow days relief bill. The Senate was very keen on local control and not stepping on any contracts that had already been made. The House had some different provisions in that. We ended up with a compromise, which I still think got to the heart of the deal. We did not want our superintendents going to jail. That truly was a possibility if hours were not met. Imagine that. So there would be a funding loss and superintendents could theoretically go to jail.
Superintendent, not the school board.
It truly was the superintendent. The buck stops here. So, but we're glad that we didn't have to face that. That was a one-time thing. We don't anticipate this kind of weather again. There were a couple caveats, however. So any school any district that said we're going to count some snow day relief days, did Rochester need to use any of those?
We did not.
Did not. Okay, good planning on your part. And one of the things for school districts that did, they have to report that to the commissioner, and then they must seriously consider e-learning days for future budgets, and I know that they are. A few things that didn't pass. One of the things that did not pass, which I think was really a significant win that it did not pass, and that was rolling back the teacher licensure reform of a year ago. It hadn't even received its first birthday yet. And one of the interesting things was the Minneapolis schools testified against this. Actually, everyone testified against rolling back this reform because our teacher licensure system was so broken. And they were also concerned particularly about teachers of color. And 25% of our teachers of color would have lost their licensure under this. So there was only one group that testified in favor of rolling back the teacher licensure reforms, and that was Ed Minnesota. Whether it be the Minnesota School Board Association, every other group testified in keeping the existing teacher licensure reform. Tax credits for education scholarships in non-public schools, that did not pass. And I'll need your help on this going forward because this next item is going to come back next year, and I know Rochester's been kind of in the forefront of this in a case, and this has to do with pupil dismissals for disciplinary reasons. There was a bill brought forth in the House that was pretty top-down as far as the state telling school districts what they could and could not do regarding pupil dismissals. I know there's already a lot of rules and regs about that. And so I'm sure that will be back again. And we'll want to talk about that. There were some regulations regarding school journalism, how school districts could have any type of say on what's printed, like in the school newspapers, for example. And so that will be something that will be back again. Those were two things that I know will be back that certainly your input will be most needed on. On the budget, on the school budget, it was a 6.9% increase over existing funding. There was also something about another bill in the House that passed had to do with very detailed lunch shaming policies. And again, it was top down. I know the Minnesota School Board Association has a policy. I know the Rochester School does as well. Typically, we try and keep, I try to focus on local control on these things. I think you know the situation best, you know the kids best. and you know what's going to work best. But those things are going to be coming back. And then I'll give you just a little sheet here, because as I looked at this, I realized, oh, most of this is education. Imagine that. So this sheet just talks on the front page. You don't actually need to, that we already covered that on the budget. You're welcome to look at that. But the thing on the back are some additional education initiatives that were passed into law. Well, I guess the dialysis treatment is not exactly. These are some of my bills that passed into law. I think I had about 18 this year. But the ones here, Cradle to Career, thank you for being leaders in that. I anticipate we'll see great results with that. We did pass funding for Cradle to Career this year, and they are up and ready to go. Bridges to Healthcare, this school district has been a great partner with Mayo Clinic and RCTC in getting this Bridges to Healthcare. We've seen great results there, often with some of our most at-risk kids. That was funded again. I was a co-sponsor on that bill. The rest were bills that I sponsored. I want to thank the Rochester School District for your leadership in vaping, in making vaping part of the Clean Indoor Air Act, and particularly on T21. I know that it might have been a bit of a challenge, but I will just say that, as you know, I just thank you for that. And Superintendent Munoz, I thank you for your leadership on that. Your testimony was very clear at the county board, and I'm glad to see that Olmsted County is once again leading in these tobacco-free things. And I'll just say that the brain science is clear on, as you know, they wait till 21 to start, they're less likely to be addicted. And the Department of Defense is seeking to be tobacco-free. So some people tried to use that as a reason not to support T21. I'm hoping now that we've seen over 30 districts across the state support T21, I'm hoping we'll see a statewide resolution. I'm going to continue to push on that. It's time, and your help will be very important. P-TECH was another initiative for our district. Again, Rochester's out leading, and there's great excitement about this innovation of breaking down that silo between K-12 and higher education, P-TECH, Pathways in Technology, Early College, High. Secret sauce, got to have three things. Got to have a school district that's willing, you got to have a partner community college, and you have to have a partner industry. And there's great interest in that. The funding has been designated to Rochester. These are often schools within a school. There's been over 100 of them in the nation so far. They've been highly successful, particularly with kids that might be at risk. And we've had great industry partner interest as well. That's ongoing funding in both years of the budget. It increases in the second year, and then it continues on into the base. So we're very glad about that. The last thing I'll mention is construction careers. One of the things we know is those are great careers. They don't often get, there's great workforce crisis all across our district, and particularly in construction. One of the things that I'm looking forward to is we required a report and funded it, make sure we get it and get it back, which is looking at how can our kids get hands-on training in construction careers safely on a job site. And so the Department of Labor and Industry and the Education Commissioner, those two commissioners, are working to look at what can we do in that regard. And I know that would be helpful to Rochester as well. So I've spoken quite a bit, but I will tell you it's great to represent you and these over 17,000 students. And I thank you. And I'll be glad to talk to the chair, or if there's any questions, I'll be glad to answer those too. But thank you so much.
Yeah, I have a question, maybe it's more of a comment on special education and how we are billed back from another district. So if the student moves out, we still get the bill. But we also don't get the per pupil funding for that student, do we? So if we have a student who moves from here to wherever, and we're billed back, the wherever is getting the money, the per pupil funding.
Well, the
from
bill
state.
back is the difference between what the district gets and what the cost is.
Right, but my point is, we don't get any of the benefit of the funding for the student because they're not here anymore.
The funding follows the student. That's kind of a basic
But we
tenet.
still get the bill without having that funding available.
Well, you get the bill for the part that was an increase over what the student received from both federal and states. So the bill back isn't like for the whole thing.
No, I know,
Yeah,
but-
the bill back is for the gap, yes.
Right, the bill back is, I mean, it's still money. that
Oh,
we-
yes, it's
We
significant.
have lost the per pupil funding that was attached to that pupil, but we're still getting some kind of a bill.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. No, it's a problem. And I will say some schools, districts have literally, I mean, they've shown me their books. They've had to let 2 teachers go. Because some of these, and there's a problem too on the calendar, these come back because it's reimbursed expenses. So these come back after the fact, after you set your next budget. So there's a whole host of problems, yes.
John's nodding his head.
Yes.
Yes. I think, John, you
In
testified on
about
this, didn't you?
January to
Yes.
April is when you figure out the previous year's
Yeah,
problem.
and so we are aware, we are open for, good ideas. And like I said, we're doing some different things, trying to figure that out, but you all probably have the best solutions. Yes.
Director Nathan.
So given that the next legislative session isn't about passing a budget, but will focus on policy, is there anything that you see in the special ed area from the policy side that
Yes.
is going to be focused on, that might alleviate some of the issues?
Oh, thank you, Kathy. Yes, in fact, I forgot to mention, we got a start on that this year. We passed some reforms that are to try and help alleviate paperwork that is not necessary or not helpful to kids regarding special education. We got a couple of those bills passed. There's more to do on that. I think those will be back. I'm continuing to look at this bill back situation, even though, so it's a policy. And, this is good that we've combined policy and finance, because almost all policy has a finance attachment, and you don't want to spend money without good policy behind it. So I do anticipate that. I'm just we're still trying to figure out what's the best way to do this bill back piece. But I anticipate those things for sure. And also, I encourage you to give me your resolutions or things that the school board thinks is important. And we'll start working on those. And I work with my team every week, so we're already trying to put things together. So it's not too early to start.
Other comments, inquiries?
I had one more. On the school safety, I know it was dependent on what the state's finances turned out to be. Is that been?
Yes, 30 million.
Okay.
So we got the full funding there. Mhm. Yes, good question. Yes.
If we were to submit legislative priorities, when would those be most useful to you?
The sooner the better, but certainly before December. Because December, and I will tell you, the bonding, next year's a bonding year. I'm on the bonding committee, and we're going to start our bonding tours in September. And then, but the good news is session doesn't start until February next year. So we really can work through January on legislative priorities and legislation. But typically, the earlier the better. The way that I work, I try and get those ideas and bring in lots of folks to look at them and try and, before I even write the bill, I try and work out as many bugs as possible. You can always do that. That happens during the amendment process. Bills always get refined in committee. But I usually like to do a lot of the legwork up front, just to build a broader advocacy group and diminish those who are against it.
Director Workman, perhaps you could speak to, and you are on the MSBA Delegate Assembly, and there is that component of legislative.
Right, and we can, well, as you know, maybe you don't know, I'm assuming you do because you're very knowledgeable on these issues, is that any district can submit a resolution to the MSBA Delegate Assembly, and then we vote as to whether or not it should go on or not. So in previous years, Rochester has not, well, one board member submitted one thing once, quite a while ago, and it didn't even get a second, so it wasn't even heard. But an individual school board member can submit a resolution, the board as a whole can submit a resolution. One of the things that I have pushed for in the past and gotten nowhere, and maybe this is a good year to get somewhere, is if our board had a legislative committee where we could work through some of these issues so that we could actually have something not only to give to you, but also to present to MSBA and get their feedback or support for it.
That's helpful to be on their priority list.
Right, yes. A number of years ago, there were a couple of issues that I spoke to, or actually it was the 424, I think, when we were getting just 212.
Oh, for the local option revenue?
Yes, and.
Oh, that's been combined now, you probably know that,
Yeah, and
yeah.
everybody was very surprised that Rochester only got 212. And so I think, you know, that my speaking to that at least had some kind of an effect of at least getting it going. So those positions are really important, and the, you know, anything we can do to help you by giving you information, I think is really good.
Mr. Chair, that would be very helpful. That would be incredibly helpful. When's your deadline? I mean, when is it that the resolutions go to the MSBA?
I would say probably, we go through them first in mid-November. So they like to get them late October, but you can submit something even as late as mid-November or even on the day of our meeting, which is the first Friday in December. You know, so there's some time, but.
Thank you.
So Senator Nelson, you are encouraging that local control and as well as local voice. And we definitely as a board want to be supportive of, well, responsive to your willingness to hear from and maybe to even be involved in those public sessions that you may hold locally to address issues that may affect us all. And to that end, even, Board, I want you to know that Senator Nelson and I had an opportunity to speak this afternoon. She called me out of the blue, and we spoke yesterday regarding today, but today's call was kind of unrelated, but related. And before I tell you what it was about, I was encouraged regarding the leadership that Senator Nelson demonstrated by actually not running from an issue, but acknowledging that, you know, the social media event that occurred that was covered broadly, and how she wanted to put that to rest. And from my point of view, that is showing good leadership. You know, as a nation, we want to, of course, be unified, and I think sometimes we allow our opinions or how we express ourselves to become divisive. And so Senator Nelson asked, well, Don, if you think it appropriate or if you think the opportunity would present itself to allow her an opportunity to just speak to that momentarily so that we might know and hear from her and be assured that she has moved forward. There is no animus, there's no, well, I don't want to speak for her, but
Sure.
since you're here, Senator.
Sure. Well, it's kind of like I will just tell you, I was out at the fairgrounds tonight before I came here, and lo and behold, a person came up to me. I was getting the first shaved ice from the Olmsted County Fair.
Of course.
Of course, I was so lucky. I was right there. Anyway, a gentleman came up to me and said, I just want to, he said, I'm a teacher in Rochester. He goes, I just want to tell you, I was sorry to see those display. And I thought, well, that's interesting, you know, that was months ago. And so I do want to, you know, as I said, I think it was an unfortunate lapse in judgment. We all have those, there's no doubt about it. Social media does amplify things, for sure. And so I know that that wasn't a position of the school board or many teachers, and I heard from many in person, as tonight, and via email as well. So I know that was just and I know it was at Minnesota, it was the teachers union. And the one thing I would say is I can almost understand why they may have been so frustrated. Because the issue is you really kind of have to understand how the legislative process works. And it's just like you cannot settle negotiations without knowing how much money you're going to be working with. It's the same way in the Senate. You can't write a Senate bill that you don't have money to pay for. And unfortunately, our leaders, they tried, they said by May 6th, the governor and the House and the Senate were going to come together on this joint budget. Well, May 6th came and went, and by May 19th, it wasn't until the evening before our mandated adjournment date that those three leaders came together and said, this is going to be the size of the budget in Minnesota. And because we have a balanced budget amendment, you got to say how you're going to pay for it. And they said how they were going to pay for it. And then that led to the final resolution. But for people who might not know how all that plays out, or sometimes people, kind of agitate things up on social media, it's hard to understand. And I know that everyone is very passionate, most people are very passionate about education. And that's because we know that education is the great equalizer. And those of you who have been to the Senate committee know that every agenda starts with that. It's printed on there, it's a grounding statement. Education is the great equalizer. It's the moral issue of our day. It's the racial issue of our day, and it's the economic issue of our day. And that's why we focus on students, we fund what works, and we look for innovations and incentives to drive better results. And that's on every single agenda. And knowing that people are passionate about education, I can understand. I get pretty passionate about it too, because it's our future. And so I want all to know, I know that that was not anything that came from the school board or the school district at all. And another great leader here, I heard Superintendent Munoz apologize for that behavior. And the one thing I'll close with, I know, as you've probably heard this before, that great leaders take more than their share of the blame and less than their share of the credit. And so I think we've got a lot of great leaders here, and I'm just really honored to be a part of you, working with you today.
Well, we appreciate you taking.
Can I make one more observation?
Yes.
First of all, I really appreciate the extra money that the school board can actually levy without having a referendum. It's really frustrating that the city and the county can just go ahead and raise taxes because, well, we're short here, so we're going to raise your taxes, where we are really constrained, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but we have to go to the voters and say, would you give us more money so that we don't have to cut teachers? Referenda used to be the extras, and now it's too much of the basic stuff. And like I said, I really appreciate the flexibility that boards have now to generate some more money without going to, residents, but it still kind of sticks in my craw that the city and the county can do all that.
It does, and we've certainly discussed that, and the challenge is oftentimes the school district gets, people have one chance to vote, and they're saying, what? I've already seen an increase in the city taxes and the county taxes, and so I'm saying no to, and of course about 20% of our households don't have students. And so there's a whole host of issues. I do want to say that the city and the county, though, the difference is, because I've had to wrestle with this myself, quite frankly, the city and the county get a very small percent of their budget from the state. I think the county is about 0.2%, the city might be about 2% of its budget from the state. Our schools are very different. Years ago, I think it was under Governor Ventura, the state took over the funding for schools, and right now, our education budget, as I said, is over $20.1 billion for the next 2 years. It's over 41% of our state budget. And according to the NEA, we're one of the top 4 best funded states as far as the percent of money that comes from the state. But that's not to say there are not issues. And regarding the referendum, it's actually, I don't want to disappoint you. I'd like to have you think this is a good thing, but the amount is the same as it was before. So you do have that now from like 2014 or 16, I think it was. But we just kind of cleaned up the language and combined them. So yeah, so it isn't like new referendum amounts. Yeah. Oh, good. Yeah, just wanted to make sure. So thank you very much. I think we all know how to get hold of one another. I do hope you contact me. That's how we get our best ideas going forward, and know that I'm here to serve you. Rochester is the largest school district, well, 3rd largest in the state, and certainly the largest school district actually 7th largest in the state, largest certainly in my Senate district. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I appreciate all that you do.
I'll just quickly add, in the 8 years I've been here, I've enjoyed working with you. You've always been supportive of education, and I appreciate the opportunities where you're thinking of potential ideas, and sometimes you'll reach out to me and say, what do you think? How's this going to impact Rochester? So we appreciate that you always keep us in mind. even though I know you represent the entire state,
Oh,
but
yes.
you do think about us, and we appreciate the opportunities where P-TECH's a perfect example, how you find a way to throw a little extra our way, so we appreciate that very much.
Well, thank you, and I anticipate great results from
Yeah.
P-TECH, and I expect to see more funding for P-TECH, and I couldn't think of a better place for it to start than with Rochester. So,
Thank you.
thank you so much. Have a good evening, and thank you for the generous use of your time tonight.
Sure, thank
Yeah,
you.
bye-bye.
Yeah, the chair's going to entertain a very quick 5-minute recess.
Another 5 minutes and not.
Right, at
appreciate that.
6:20, 18.
Yeah. Hey, how are you?
You're gonna have something else, I don't know.
So we'll reconvene at 6:27 and turn it back over to Director Nathan.
Okay, so let's recap on step 2. It is our mid-year reflection. Just want to be clear for the notes. We're going to do it at a regular board meeting as an agenda item. So that's to Wendy to schedule for sometime in January. And the exec committee perhaps can remind the board around that time to review the evaluation tool in preparation for the meeting. And then we'll have whatever format the superintendent chooses to present that agenda item and have our conversation at that meeting. And that will take care of step 2.
Director Workman.
And I actually wrote this down because I didn't want to forget it. You had suggested that board members can always contact Mike with suggestions or with questions or suggestions. But I think we have to remember that one board member cannot say to Mike, you need to do this way or do this instead. That has to be a full board decision. I'm sure he would appreciate any questions that we would have or clarification things. And then if it's an issue, then the board member could take that to exec and you could decide whether or not you want to include it on the agenda.
And I appreciate that, Julie, because I think even sometimes as we have discussions, even during the course of a study session or other opportunities, we may lose sight of we're really just simply offering an opinion, but if you feel strongly about that, then we need to, I suppose, up-channel it, so to speak, or just confer with other board members and move forward. Thank you very much. Director Nathan?
So are we good on step 2? Great. So moving on to step 3, the end of the year evaluation. I think we can also cross out preparing the evaluation tool because once we finalize it at this point, it'll be the same one we use for the end of the year evaluation. Again, reminding the board to review the evaluation tool to prepare for the meeting. We'll have that end of year evaluation meeting in a closed session and then present the summary of the end of the year evaluation at the next school board meeting as an agenda item.
And
Director Martin?
could I suggest too that at some point prior to step 3, the board or the executive committee will determine how we're going to do that. You know, for instance, if all board members are going to fill out the tool in advance of that closed session meeting and send them in, or what process the board is going to use so that they can have the discussion in an effective, efficient way and come up with a report for the superintendent that is sort of comprehensible.
A note I wrote myself, I appreciate that, because I think you need to have that decided before you go in. The fact that we spend 4 to 6 hours for it, that's not very reasonable for anybody. I don't think you want to do that. So prior to doing that, you know, we tried, everybody filled out their individual form, and then we were going to come to consensus, but I think it's just good to have, so everybody's on the same page on how you're going to come up with what gets into the evaluation and what doesn't.
Yeah, I think it really has to be fine-tuned, because the other thing that we've all experienced is that once it becomes sort of a free-for-all conversation with anecdotes and whatever, it's exhausting. We lose focus, and then what we come up with for the superintendent just isn't very meaningful, so.
Director Workman.
Yeah, I think one of the things I think that has happened in at least some of our previous closed sessions where Mike has not been present is that board members have felt that that was an opportunity for them to air a year's worth of grievances or whatever, which I would suggest that instead of saving them all for that particular meeting is that you deal with them as they come up through the year. And a lot of that stuff had absolutely nothing to do with Mike's evaluation.
Right.
So,
One other thing on this, if you have the MSBA Guide to Superintendent Evaluation on page A6, wow, these numbers are small, they actually have a sample form for how to do the end-of-year summative evaluation. And the recommendation is that each board member, when we get to the form, you'll see that there's a ranking system for each goal. And then there are 4 questions that they ask be answered. So for the goals and standards, which best illustrates the superintendent's greatest strength and why. For the goals and standards, which presented the superintendent with the greatest challenge and why. And how might the school board enhance the superintendent's strengths and assist in overcoming challenges. So what I like about this is that everything ties back to the goals and standards, and the way they ask for the feedback from the individual board members is to relate the feedback to the goals and standards. So I think that'll help Jean with how to put us all on the same discussion page if we're all answering the same questions and directing them back to reflection on the goals and standards.
so will what you just referenced be a part of the superintendent's evaluation tool, not in terms of the evaluation, but the packet that we as a board will ultimately receive and advance?
We could add that. Yep.
Okay. And then additionally, not to lose sight of the point both that Director Marvin and Superintendent Munoz made, will there also be while we see the 6/30/20, are we going to, or will the subcommittee potentially recommend a time frame for the actual evaluation to be completed by the board and submitted to the, that's something that you guys are willing to do? Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to see that in there.
Okay.
So like when we might send the information out to the board, when it will be due back,
Exactly.
et cetera.
Exactly. Just when you thought your work was just about over.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So is the ball still in your court at this point, Director Nathan?
yeah,
Or is it-
sorry.
Okay.
So, as we indicated in the previous one, that we're on establishing goals and standards, and what the MSBA recommendations were to establish 2 or 3 district-focused goals, which I think we've presented so far. But it also talks about 1 or 2 professional development goals. But because we haven't had the feedback from Mike as to what he was looking for goals, and I think at one point in the study session last time, Mike, you mentioned that you did want to perhaps also suggest or talk about a professional development
I
goal.
guess I don't know what that means.
Well,
I don't know, I guess I don't know, what would a professional development goal be?
things that maybe you wanted to work on for your own professional.
Well, everything I do is to
Well,
make me a better leader. I mean, when I go to conferences, I guess I honestly struggle with that one a little bit, because, I mean, if there was a deficiency noticed in a previous standard,
Right.
then maybe you would target that. But I guess
And I don't know that it was necessarily intended to come from us. I think it was more opening the door if you had something.
Like if I set my professional development goals for the year, it might be going to a conference to
Right.
learn on this topic.
Yes.
That's
And,
one of my professional development goals for the year.
Right.
and I know, I mean, I think we have it set in policy somewhere that, at least I remember from when I was board chair, that if you were going to go to something and it was within your budget, you would simply mention it to the chair. It wasn't like I had to approve it, but it was more like, oh, I'm gonna be doing this really cool conference, whatever. But I've always felt that you are the one who chooses where you go for your professional development or that benefits the district. I mean, I'm thinking of, okay, you're doing all this Bill Daggett stuff. That would be a really good example, which is, you know, I don't know how you would say, well, I'm gonna have this goal that I'm gonna go to a Bill Daggett conference. So, I mean, I understand your struggle with that because it doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
But it could be broader. It could be a skill or a competency that you wanted to develop that was a series of conferences or whatever. I mean, I just put that up there to open the door in the event that you had something that you wanted to include.
You're always bored, you're always doing that stuff, so it doesn't need to be something that you do worry about, but we all know that there's always people who don't always develop themselves.
Yeah.
This is more focused on them,
Okay.
which is not you.
All right.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that was really the let's move on. Let's not beat that one.
Yeah. So in the document draft that you have, just to define some of the components. So if you're looking at draft form 1, establish goals and standards, goal number 1. So that goal number 1 represents the performance goal, which is a statement that describes the desired outcomes of the superintendent's work. The performance standard, which is in the box below, so in the first example it says standard 7, student support, written criteria against which a superintendent's work is assessed and determines to determine level of growth and or functioning. And you also see that there's element 7A, so that's a performance element, which further defines the superintendent's responsibilities within the standard. And if you looked at the MSBA book, there were 10 different areas of performance standards, and within each were 4 to 5 to 6 different elements. So do that math. It's impossible to evaluate the superintendent every year on all of those combinations, which is why it's that recommendation of 3 goals with 1 or 2 under each. And you also notice that in the standards, the level of performance is progressive. So there's a description of the performance standard as being what it looks like if it's highly effective, what it looks like if it's effective, what it looks like if it's developing, and what it looks like if it's ineffective and then not applicable. And then the next component is up next to the goals, which are the evidence of performance. And those are the specific measures or progress indicators that demonstrate the performance of the superintendent in that goal area. So those are the components of the goals and standards language for each of the goals. And so what we thought was on our list tonight was to review this draft, discuss if there's any other ideas for performance goals. There was something mentioned at the conversation that you had with the superintendent about further discussion about daily duties and other activities that perhaps the superintendent wanted clarification. And then if we get to it, to discuss a timeline for our school board goals and evaluation process, even if it's just to say we're going to talk about it at this study session in the future.
Can I ask you a question?
Yep.
Since you're doing the talking. And how did you land on these particular goals?
These 3.
Yeah.
We'll go back to
I
that.
mean, I see that maybe some of it was from a previous session, but I was just curious as to what methodology you used. And if I was asleep and missed it, I'm fine.
I would love you to believe that there is a specific methodology, but I think the 3 of us came into this with sort of 3 different ideas about what we were looking for. I couldn't get past the district, the core goals, the district, the mission statement, the vision, and I kept looking for ones that were about access and equity, student achievement, and accountability. And to me, these 3 standards, Standard 7, Standard 8, and Standard 6 spoke specifically to those.
So I think in more broad terms, I don't know. less vague terms, more vague terms, I don't know which way I'm going. So we took the what I called the framework from that we had presented last time, and kind of rehashed that in a way. And then I have my chicken scratch notes, enter into evidence. And we kind of talked them through and kind of said, you know, who thinks that this is important? You know, in what way do we think this is important? And sort of that's where we landed on, by consensus, the things that rose to the top for us based on looking at the framework and the input that we had at the discussion, really. So again, I know I keep going back to finance, but you know, finance has not been an area that we have talked of late. Like, we're really concerned about finance. We want to have a performance goal around finance. Everybody's concerned about that. We need to get that in. So it was just trying to identify that.
Right.
But then back to, and because there's sort of, we liked more than 3, so we kind of squished, for lack of a technical term, some of them together. But these are just, as we say, emerged. Is that a
Deborah,
word?
would you hold up that first piece of paper?
This one?
Not the scratching one, the one before.
The chart?
The chart.
Oh.
Okay, that's the one I couldn't find today.
Oh,
Is that somewhere?
From the
it's
last
right here.
study session.
But is it on board docs?
Yeah, thought you sent it out for the last study session.
This one has red on it, so is that your version, Kathy?
That was my version because I put it in,
You
yeah.
reformatted.
I did that for our meeting.
Yes.
But the version of that is
What
on
was the
board.
date on that study session?
June 11th?
So are we
No, it was the
losing,
email you sent out before the study session, Deborah, sorry.
Okay, because I don't see anything in board docs. I shouldn't know.
But while you're looking for that,
Yeah.
if I may too, the thing that,
I was looking for the chart, that's all.
okay.
Well, this is kind of the chart without Kathy's
Okay.
template and red ads. So it's close. If that's helpful.
The thing about all 3 of these, which I think is a strength, but might make it a little bit more complicated, is that it's not Mike specific. It's not like, Mike, you got to show up on time better, or Mike, you need to
Take a vacation?
It's not things that Mike needs to do differently. It's things that we want leadership for the district. So they're really,
Well, and they relate back to the universal goals. I mean, we,
right, absolutely.
Right.
But it's things that we really believe about this school district, and that we, you know, we want to empower Mike to get these things done. But they're not personal in terms of, these are the areas in which you're weak and you really have
Right.
to improve.
right.
Which I think is a good thing, but it makes it tougher to check them off. You know, we're not going to be taking attendance, for instance.
Director Adamson?
So I don't have a problem with any of the goals as stated in the draft. And I'm not suggesting that we go back and start over on these at all, but I wanted to express a little bit of surprise that the goals were chosen for this draft, not from the entire 7-person board, and so I would suggest that at future cycles, that there be a brainstorming session that involves all 7 members, and then some sort of a process that helps to prioritize which 3 or whatever chosen member comes forward
Well,
in the future.
if I may, in support of the subcommittee work, simply offer that that is, in actuality, the purpose of this meeting, to allow additional input to come forth, not necessarily right now, but to give you, every board member will have opportunity to provide, upon further reflection and review of what's been presented, opportunity to forward additional concerns to the subcommittee, which will, I believe, advisably consider them. You make an excellent point. There's no reason why, I suppose, hindsight, why this could not potentially have been distributed in advance and said or shared, so it wasn't board docs. This is your opportunity to evaluate and come prepared at the study session to potentially add additional.
So my understanding was that the subcommittee was developing the tool, not the goals, so that's why I was surprised that it came back
Okay.
with goals.
I have the same question, because I have it down that we were gonna have a goals discussion on August 27th. So I think I misunderstood
I think that's
too.
what you were saying, right? That
But I think it's an excellent starting point, so that's why I'm saying I don't know that we need to, I don't
Okay.
know how everybody else feels. My personal opinion is that,
Sure. Okay.
but doing it on August 27th when we have a deadline at the end of August isn't probably feasible.
Can the subcommittee maybe speak to the rationale? Certainly you were aware of the initial tasking of tool, but also the including of goals, which may have brought us to this point where we are right now, where we will say, actually we're kind of ahead of the curve a little, and we may not necessarily have to try to do that at that meeting if we can potentially discuss those things at this meeting.
Well, the resources that are provided in the MSBA booklet have a sample goals and standards form, but it's generic. It's not specific to the district. So I think
What page is that on a page?
it is on A4.
84?
A4.
84.
So what this form is if you look at the content, is that Standard 7 and Element 7A and Standard 7 Element 7G are actually taken almost directly from the MSBA documentation. So they provide the standard and the element and the criteria on which to evaluate it, if those are the standards and elements you choose. The unique work that we did specific to the district was the language in the goal, which MSBA recommends you use some of the general standards of what superintendent performance areas and job description areas are, and then evidence of performance that is specifically relevant to what you use in your district. So what we did was take 3 areas that we thought were priorities related to the overall priorities of the district and made a customized form for the district. So if you want to talk about which part of the work was creative, it was the goal and evidence of performance, whereas the standard that we chose were the ones that we thought were in the MSBA model that were most related to the goals and the standards that we chose. Now, when we look back at how we got to those 3 goals, there's the list that's on page 12. And this is the chart that I talked about, the 40 combinations. And this is where we went through each of those areas and sort of gave it an up or down vote. Is that, if you look at the overall priority areas of the district and the success of our students in our schools, which are the ones that we think are driving that the most?
If I may, Kathy, I think the issue was, or not issue, the point was the understanding that a tool would be presented, and you're speaking to the criteria utilized for the goals and standards, okay?
Right, but I don't think you can create a tool without
Yeah,
filling in
you
the
created
goals and
a
standards.
sample like they created
Right,
there.
right,
You didn't come with a tent where these are set in stone,
Right.
gotta do them.
Absolutely.
Because they just gave you a blank form.
And we filled it in based on
Yeah.
what we thought
Yeah.
we had been
Right.
hearing about the
Right.
district priorities
Right.
and what it was.
So I want to make sure that Director Atmanson is, are you okay with the presentation of the tool and then what we have as an example?
Yep.
And so next steps then, and maybe if we could, and Mike, I think maybe even you, Wendy, also were kind of unsure as to, well, tool, and we're looking at gold standards. So can we, how do we mesh these things together to where we're okay to continue the conversation, so to speak?
Well, I wonder if, the template that we're using is right from the book. I mean, that's it. That was easy because the language in terms of the criteria, 4321, that's right from the book. The standards, right from the book. The evidence of performance, we created. The goals, we came up with the language for that. So I think the first thing is, does this template work? And I think for me, it's mainly if Mike thinks this could be effective, that we would end up having sort of 3 goals, maybe a couple of standards per goals. To my way of thinking, there's a lot of discussion we can do about evidence of performance. Are these things, well, even before we get to that, does this seem doable? Is it about the right number of areas that we're covering, and is the
Yeah, I if you notice, they give the Iowa School Board Association credit because, and I was on the group that created that for the Iowa School Board Association, so it's very similar to what we had in Iowa. Very similar to what we did a few years ago with the standards. And this is something I brought up with Dawn and Deborah yesterday. Just looking, and I know this is just a sample, and you gotta, if you gave us a blank sheet with goals, it wouldn't make, at least for me, I couldn't understand. So I get that, but I do like the fact that the goals you did use as samples connect to the strategic plan, universal goals, so that's good. But I don't think the intent was these are set in stone, we're done, because we have on our agenda, our calendar, August, we're setting those. But just like when we bring something to the board, we bring a draft to start, because we know if we bring a blank piece of paper, we're there forever. So I think that's the way I see this. So a couple things I brought up. One, for example, on, I don't remember which goal, but one of the goals as evidence of performance, there was reference to surveys. And not that that's not a good evidence, but my concern will be from there, as a board member, I think one of them, one that I actually brought up.
Go through.
Okay. Staff satisfaction. Okay. So conversation I had with Deborah and Don was, okay, in order to get well, if you read their book, you'll never get a 4. So in order to get a 3, let's say we survey, how many staff have to fill out the survey before you say it's really a reflection of what majority of the staff? And then, we've had multiple surveys where your communication is awesome, your communication is terrible, and then everything else in between. So for Kathy, what does Kathy need to see number-wise to do a 3? What does Jean need to see to score? I mean, how are you going to be consistent on what does a 3 mean to the board versus what does a 3 mean to each individual?
When you're talking about 3, you're talking about the results of the staff.
Yeah, I mean, because
surveys,
basically
or-
this is a rubric that you use.
Oh, right.
So how do you
the
determine,
results.
what is a 3? Is a 3 to you the same as what a 3, on a survey, for example? And then the other thing that I mentioned too is, and my understanding of reading the school board's thing is that these were samples of evidence that you could use, and that's exactly what we did in Iowa and what we did when I came here. There were multiple things. There was not, this is the only evidence that you can use because some of the examples here, as I shared with them Monday, was what we've learned is that us telling each school, you have to have a behavior goal, you have to have then they had an equity plan, and then they had, when I first came here, you had to have a reading and a math goal. If I'm a school that, I don't remember what school and went over the data, they had 10 office rules the entire school year. For me to say you have to have a behavior goal, it probably doesn't make sense to them. So what we do is we provide them all their data, and they look at their data and determine what is our goals for our site plan. Instead of the district saying, you must have this, this, and this. And what we're wanting to do next year is equity is the lens for everything you do. So equity would be woven into whatever your site goal is. So if we kept exact evidence of performance, not every school is going to have a behavior goal. So I guess I like the idea that these are samples of different things that you could use to demonstrate that.
And I think that was one of the, when I had my list of questions for the discussion tonight, that was really what most everything focused on was get the language of the goal right, and then have a conversation with you on how these evidence of performance actually play out in real substance, real product, and timelines, right? The timelines related to when we have to do
Right.
your evaluation, what's even available to feed into that. So
Right.
that's where I was hoping that we would have that conversation, is to, when you say staff satisfaction survey, well, how many instruments are there out there that qualify as that?
Yeah.
Would we have to develop one? Would we have to buy one? Right? That was where I wanted to see some of this conversation go.
Okay.
If we've sort of agreed that the tool is okay, then I wonder if the next conversation, and we may not have that tonight, the next kind of feedback we need is, do we have the standards, student support, ethical and inclusive leadership, teaching and learning? Are those the ones we need, or do we need to look at different standards? After, and I don't know if we want to come to an agreement on that tonight or not. After that, then, do we have the goals right based on student support, ethical and inclusive leadership, and teaching and learning? And then I think the longer discussion, or the final discussion, is how are we going to measure that? What are going to be the evidence of performance? And I think it's critically important that Mike kind of drives that, because what do I want to see may not be the same kind of thing that is going to be meaningful to the superintendent. And if it's not meaningful to Mike, we're not doing a good job of evaluating things. We're not giving him the kind of feedback that he needs.
Or even a meaningful measurement of outcome for whatever the goal is for the district.
Right. So, yeah, to me, those evidence of performance things, to me, that's
Well, yeah, that's
big conversation.
the rubber in the road, right?
But meanwhile, are these, and I know everybody doesn't have the book in front of them, and we don't have to stick with just the standards in the book, although there's, how many, 70 of them in there?
Yeah.
Lots. If we've got, those are looking pretty good. And maybe we're not ready to decide that tonight either. But I think that's the first thing, then the goals, and then after that, how do we measure the evidence?
So are we really saying that Mike's goals are the district's goals? That those, it sounds to me like those two things right now are synonymous.
Well, I think what we're measuring is how is he leading the district in the direction that we want to go, and that the graduate profile said we're going to go. But it's his leadership and being specific. So if we're looking at student support, what are we going to be looking for? And so here, for instance, if Mike knows that student engagement and feedback. At our last board meeting, a group of people were sitting up there talking about the fact that kids are more engaged now than they were before. They're talking to their principals on a regular basis. They were involved in getting changes made to the health curriculum. It's that kind of thing. It seems to me that if we're going to get this district moving, we have to make sure that we're listening to students. And for the first time in, I think, a really long time, in the last year or two, we've been doing that. We've been empowering them to get involved, to speak up, to talk to their principals, and the principals have to listen. But I would hate to lose that, so I'll shut it now.
Well, let me do this. Mike has provided the board chair, the board with his goals for 2019-20, okay? And in advance of the requirement that we had whatever that time frame would be. Having those, I think ideally, wouldn't we want his goals to be a factor of consideration at this time?
We don't have.
We don't have.
No, so I'm going to just read them, make them available. I don't know, Wendy, if you are able to. But number one, progress made on Universal Goal 1, which is access and equity. Okay? Language for 2 and 3 will be the same. Progress made on Universal Goal 2, which is student achievement. And then 3, progress made on Universal Goal 3, accountability. Okay?
Can we either get those written or can you?
Yeah, we're going to get these available to you. Okay?
Which I think, sorry, Don.
Go ahead. Oh, thank you.
The sample standards that you selected do fit, match with the 3 universal goals, which is the only other one that I think kind of partially does is the governance team standard references, nope, not that one, my fault. It was the, where did I see? Yes, it references goals and or strategic plan, but that's broader strategic plan versus the student support, teaching and learning, and the third one, 8, 7, 8, and 6, directly tied to the 3 goals that are on our strategic plan. So,
I'm sorry, Mike, what were you referencing?
I was saying, I think the ones that the 3 standards that you selected as a sample kind of hit, basically say the same thing I'm saying. Just you found a standard that matches each of the universal goals versus just in broad.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and as you said too, for instance, Standard 7 is about student achievement. I mean, all of them are about student achievement. The thing there, and as you said before, this isn't about math scores and reading scores. It's about specific stuff we'd like to see happening in terms of student achievement, which I'm assuming doesn't mean that we're going to quit paying attention to scores.
Right. Well, one of the things that we'll bring at the second August meeting with this strategic plan is the dashboard that we want to create. It's more than NWAs and MCAs. It's graduation rate. It's kids that have taken at least one college course or an AP course, or kids that have earned some type of certification, like those that go to CTEC, to parent satisfaction with the district. I mean, it's not just the achievement academic state scores, it's everything. How some of the results of our panorama socio-emotional wellness of students, we're going to be able to demonstrate how kids are doing and progressing in those areas. So trying to give a broader view of how the district is doing versus just
A little bit, it's more comprehensive.
right.
And that goes back to one of the questions that I had on the goal 2, because the goal 2 talks about improving academic outcomes, and the highly effective standard talks about closing the achievement gap. So it makes sense that we could perhaps use that dashboard as one of our evidence of performance for goal 2. But, right, that's a new tool that we didn't have available to us when we were developing the structure. So that's, I'm encouraged by that as an example of a kind of way we can make this really relevant to what we're doing now, as opposed to what we've done in the past.
Right.
MCA scores.
Yeah.
So how does the things that we metrics that we've sort of used in the past, how do those actually fit in? So for example, I mean, our MCA scores went down a little bit. So do we say, okay, MCA scores overall need to be at this position, or we need to know that what percentage of third graders are reading at grade level by the end of the year? Are those kinds of specifics going to come into an evaluation? I'm not saying that they should or they shouldn't, but I think we need to have that information somewhere. Maybe it's not in this particular place, but
Well, I think this is the particular place, though. I mean, if the goal has to do with academic outcomes, and we're identifying specific evidence of performance, and, you know, in the past, like I said, it's MCA scores, but now Mike is saying he has a new tool that reflects not just that one area of academic performance, but a broader range. We can make our decision as to whether he's been highly effective, developing, or ineffective based on what comes out in that dashboard. And the conclusions that he helps us draw from them, because it won't just be numbers. I'm sure you'll tell us about trends, Mike, and challenges, and, you know, achievements. And that's how we determine performance.
And so that's why the usage of the language progress being made, which is, I won't say more nebulous, but it allows for growth to occur versus a number to be achieved. And so I guess we're...
Because I personally, and we have, and I'm not speaking for the two of you, never in this conversation, we were talking about the evaluation tool, did we say a 0.5% increase in a certain measure? We never wanted to introduce that in the, because how do you set that?
Sure.
First of all.
So Director Workman, then, it's important for, I suppose, each of us to hear that, know that, and then I suppose what I don't want to see occur is whenever we adjourn this evening, leave with different levels of understanding and confidences in what was agreed upon and said. So I guess to help me, are we this is going to be an acceptable tool that we're able to use? I mean, just, I'm not asking about the specific goals that are identified within it.
You're just asking about the tool,
Right.
not the content.
Right,
at this point.
right.
Okay,
Or
'cause
has
I
the
have a lot of
subcommittee-
questions about content.
Okay. So the subcommittee has presented us with a tool, not just a blank slate with suggested language of what a goal might look like, what evidence of performance might look like, what standards might look like, okay? But they didn't draw these from, the air. They were drawn from a MSBA superintendent's evaluation. So, so where are we then? Okay, are we saying to the subcommittee, is anyone suggesting that the goals that have been identified are not worthy to be pursued any further, or do you have other goals that you'd like for them to consider or take under consideration?
Well, to point of order, they aren't setting the goals, so we wouldn't be sending a recommendation back to the subcommittee to choose the goals. We as a board have to choose the goals. They were only tasked to work on the tool.
Okay,
Correct?
correct.
Okay, so we aren't sending anything back to the committee and asking for them to bring back goals, because then we all 7 wouldn't be participating in that.
I guess what I'm not understanding, I'm understanding your question, I'm not understanding a process. I'm not understanding how 7+1 people are gonna have a conversation to get to the level of work that it took the subcommittee to develop goals suggest evidence and look at the rubric.
And I would add to that, because I don't even know that we've had the conversation yet about the draft goal language that was developed, just to see if we're all on the same page and how we understand it, which might help the conversation to find out what we feel could be missing or added or substituted.
And if I could I'm sorry, go ahead. If I could further complicate this.
Yeah, please do.
I
I
don't
feel free.
think that we're ever going to get a tool that's going to address everything. I think what we're looking for is pretty good. If something, this fits what we think is really important, we go with that. But we could spend months changing and tweaking and whatever, and I don't think it's going to make a heck of a lot of difference in terms of what happens in this district. So what I'm looking for is a tool that is going to reflect what we believe as a district, what we think the priorities should be, and then how we're going to measure that. It's not going to be everything. It's going to be more fine-tuned, but does this look pretty good? And is this something that's going to be useful for the board and for the superintendent? And if we can get that, I'm satisfied. We can change it the next year or two, tweak it a little bit. But for instance, when we were looking at the strategic plan, the cabinet came and said, here's a rough draft. This is what we think the strategic plan should look like. This is what we've gathered from the graduate profile. And then the board all together looked at the draft, talked about the language, tweaked it, changed it a little bit. But basically, it sort of was the vision from the graduate profile that we ended up approving. And I think, like some of you, I work better from a draft rather than just an empty sheet of paper. So I'm thinking if these goals, if don't reflect what we really believe and want to go forward with, we need a process between now and the next couple of weeks where people send their suggestions to the committee or to the chair or to whomever, so that we can get another draft out and saying, does this look better?
And thanks for that. And you did not add to the confusion, or complication, I'm sorry, complication. And so the intent then would be the subcommittee was established to, if you will, be that vehicle of processing, developing the tool, and the associated goals, standards, okay? What I heard Jean say and what I thought I had attempted to communicate was, now we have the opportunity to communicate back to the subcommittee our input, okay? And to do so within the next couple weeks, to allow them to, again, come back with, again, what they believe to be our agreed upon goals as far as we know and understand them. But I suppose I struggle with the suggestion that the subcommittee is not empowered to proceed, both in terms of the work they've done thus far and what they're being asked to do moving forward. That's why they were created, to do that. Okay, now we're not asking them to decide for us. No, your vote, we're not voting, but ultimately your voice is not being taken away from you. You will have ample opportunity to comment regarding whatever product they bring back.
Well, I guess I struggle with getting feedback
From
everybody, not when we're all here talking about it. I mean,
Okay.
if we had just wanted to send out a draft and get written feedback from everyone, we could have done that and not had the meeting.
Okay.
But I don't feel like, I mean, I want everybody's feedback, but I haven't yet heard any feedback on, I mean, the goals, 1, 2, and 3, is really the most original work that we had to do. We had to literally write that from scratch because there was no guidance except lists of superintendent job descriptions and our, strategic plan pieces. So those are more, I think, the three biggest philosophical original work that we had to do, and everything starts with the goal. So to get feedback on that, at least, would, I think, really help to ground us, because once you have the goal, then you can start deciding how you're gonna measure it and what criteria you're gonna use for performance. So those three goal statements, to me, I don't know that we can go forward doing any further work as a subcommittee until we know, are we all in agreement that we're on the right track with the goals or not? Is there another area of the superintendent's performance that we didn't account for in the goal, or goals for the district that we didn't account for in the goals?
I guess what I'm struggling with is, you have a goal, but you also have to decide or figure out, how do we know if this goal is being met or not? So for example, in goal 3, provide leadership to ensure building administration empower staff in shared decision-making. How do we know if that's happening and to what extent? And maybe it's happening in 12 buildings and not happening in the other ones. I mean, that's what I struggle with. I mean, I think the goals are laudable. What's hard is, how do we figure out if Mike is meeting those goals? Or how does Mike figure out what do I have to do to meet those goals? I mean, I'm just using that.
And I hear that and understand it, and I have those concerns too, but I think that's the tension that we felt was, you have to figure out some goals first, so you can talk about what artifacts, evidence you're going to use. You can't, because to me, when I hear what you say, like your example, to me, I feel like I'm not hearing you say, do you even like this as a goal? And I feel like that's what the subcommittee wants to know.
But I said I thought the goals were laudable.
Okay, well, laudable.
Okay.
Laudable is a great word, but.
I certainly don't object to the goals that you've set out, and I think you've done an admirable job in pulling those together, but I'm saying, it's sort of like, okay, it's easy to say, our goal is going to be to put people on the moon again. Well, we're gonna know either people are on the moon again or they're not. I mean, obviously it's more.
Right, so I think, and maybe I'm speaking for the subcommittee, not my subcommittee, is, to me, I think Jean tried to get us on track about looking, right? So format, we kind of all like, all right, this format seems like this would work. This is what we're going for with this three pieces for each goal, whatever. But I don't know if it's helpful to go forward and say, okay, can we look at these goals, either in total or one at a time? Yes, yay or nay, we like this, we don't like this, we wish there was a different standard attached, we wish there was a different element attached. And then you go to the next piece of evidence, which, Mike spoke of his concerns about the evidence too, but I don't think we can start with the evidence until we've decided the goals.
Right.
I would also, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I would also suggest that we all shouldn't wait to the end of the year. You can be collecting in your mind evidence of these goals throughout the school year, through board meetings, through Friday updates, it's not, I'm not even gonna think about it at the end of the year, and then when he hands me these artifacts, then, it's throughout the year, you're gonna be able to remember, oh, well, yeah, this fits that goal.
And I think we talked about it in the subcommittee, that what we were hoping to have in the evidence of performance is a time frame for when we anticipated it coming, knowing that we needed to know when they were available to make sure that they fit in the time frame of evaluation. So if we have to have your evaluation done by the end of June, but you're not gonna have this data until September, well, then maybe that's not the best evidence of performance for us to use to do the evaluation.
So if the goals are important, even if they're hard to measure, they need to be our goals. The easy thing is math scores. Math scores will increase 10%.
Right.
And that's what schools used to do. Those were those goals. Our whole strategic plan isn't that anymore. It's about student achievement, but it's about bigger stuff than that. 'Equity. Lots of different ways to measure equity, or to see it. but it's gonna be tough to put a number on it. And I think after we decide on the goals and the standards, how we're gonna assess it, the performance thing, that's our next full group meeting. And even that, I don't think will be perfect.
Now, I'm going to, Director Schlusner is a process guy, if you will. And he's been quiet, and hopefully he's been processing what he's been hearing. So, do you have anything to offer or suggest?
To me, I put trust in the subcommittee to come to the right tool. I've been through so many review processes that this tool is just as good as the next one. I think it is good to have the initial set, which I think everybody's, for the most part, in agreement with. But to Melissa's point, yes, we need to have that continued discussion, which I believe is what the next special session is all about. What I'm hearing is a lot of people with concerns of things that are already taken care of or either slated for the next meeting or not.
But the next meeting is gonna be too late.
So then we should have it sooner.
Because if we had a discussion even tonight about what the goals should be, and I'm not suggesting that, don't panic, I'm just saying, if you take several giant steps back and say, what should this process have been had we had time to start it earlier? We should probably be having a study session in, say, June that goes, what do we think is going well and where do we think we need to improve?
So
And then we decide on a list of ideas of improvement topics. And then we, in a discussion, let the important ones bubble up to the top. Then we could turn those goals over to a smaller committee to come back with recommendations on what the measurements will be. Then once we have come up with the measurements, because those aren't going to happen instantaneously, it probably took you guys a lot of research to come up with the ones that you did.
Not so much, really, no.
And then we run them by.
Being honest.
We run them by Mike, and he says, okay, this works for me, this doesn't work for me. We throw it back, and then we look at it after, so just, it doesn't have to be one big giant meeting, but just enough time.
The lesson learned here is this is better than we've ever had before. It's not perfect. There's room for improvement. Everything he says is great. Write it down. Next year we'll do exactly that.
That's what I'm asking, but I think it needs to be said now that the process wasn't great, and we agree to move forward with what we have, but to improve it and give it more time next year. That's my request. Just because I think what we have is a document that reflects three people's priorities, and we need to have
We
one
have a
that
document that
reflects.
is a draft, and it was examples
I
of
agree,
priorities.
but if we started now, we wouldn't have enough time to get a finished document by the end of August, when we only have one meeting scheduled between now and then.
Well, I guess my frustration talking about the process is if the we still have not yet evaluated the three goals that we have on the table based on a collective knowledge of what the district's priorities are. So how would you recommend getting to the selected goals if not using the documentation that we've shared with you? And, I mean, do you want to start with the MSBA list of core leadership competencies for Minnesota administrative licenses and go through each of those and say, do we want that to be one of our goals? Do we want that to be one of our goals? Do we want that to be one of our goals? I mean, I'm trying to figure out how to get from the big universe of goals that one or two of those might be on your list that aren't here,
I would
versus
recommend
starting here and going.
I would recommend a hybrid process. I think going through the list of sample, the competencies and the sample standards are a great way to spark some things. But I think at some point as a board, maybe it's not during the superintendent evaluation task. Maybe it's more of the strategic plan task. We have a discussion about maybe it's in our own self-evaluation test. We talk about what's going well, what's not going well, what do we need to focus on, but we never had that discussion as a board.
Okay, so, and I'm still learning how to be an effective chair. I did say an effective, not ineffective, right? Just a quick checking in, if you will, on the part of board members, not voting, just consensus view, what you feel right now. Do you feel that the 3 goals that we have are goals that we are a good starting point place for us? And who wants to start?
Can I explain
Okay,
my,
sure.
so I asked Wendy to bring a whiteboard because it helps me, because I'm visual and I like to stand up every once in a while. And you know me, it's my brain, right? So teaching and learning, student support, and ethical and inclusive leadership are the 3 standards that we chose based on our subcommittee discussion. And then we went through and looked at the elements. So all this is from page 12, 13 in the book. So then we looked at the elements, and as you can see, teaching and learning, we talked about school improvement and culture of cooperation. Student support is student engagement and feedback. And emotional health and social needs. Ethical and inclusive leadership is cultural competency and equity plan implementation. And so those you see are directly related to the rubrics that then we brought into each of those goals. And so I didn't explain that very well when we started, Julie, so I apologize for that. I don't know if that helps anybody think about things better, easier. I could see where when we look at this, if we were evaluating this and giving thumbs up, thumbs down, like, you know, a board member might say, I don't think teaching and learning should be here. Or, I think teaching and learning should be here, but I don't like culture cooperation, I like this other element better. And then maybe we would sub that in. So that's sort of where our process came from, in terms of how we got to where we were. I understand the frustration of having how to have everybody buy in, but I am also not a huge fan of having a meeting. I find it very difficult to work in a group, and so even if, you know, when I looked at this the other day and I thought, well, what if we, you know, whatever, 3 months before the evaluation, everybody took this and ranked it, and then somebody compiled and said, okay, well, we've got 5 board members who think governance is a big deal, and 3 who think this is, and then these are the elements. We could do that, and maybe that would get us closer to feeling like everybody had a voice. But there's still going to be, to Jean's point, there's still going to be things that are going to get missed. We're never going to hit everything that every board member wants, and I think that's the challenge of working as a board, trying to do an evaluation for one employee.
But allowing everybody input is the first step.
But I guess I'm feeling like I don't know why no one's given us any input so far.
Right. I have yet to hear any specific input on the language and the goals that we've got on the table that Deborah outlined the process, either thumbs up, thumbs down, I don't understand what it means.
You mean during
Something's
this
missing.
meeting?
Yeah.
Well,
I didn't know
even
that
back
was
to this,
what
I
we
feel like
discussed.
if somebody would have said, well, I see you've picked access and equity, I don't think student support should be there. I mean,
Right.
and granted, I did not ask for feedback, really, but
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't, which is exactly what I was gonna say, that, you know, you didn't give me feedback, but I had no idea that maybe the subcommittee wanted feedback.
I guess I assume, like any other board meeting, when board docs goes out on Friday, people look at the stuff, and if they have questions or comments, they send it in. That's just a misperception on my part, so.
Let me try something here.
I love it when
Not
you
the
say that way.
beads.
So,
And we have to have something, I mean, we can't keep going past August, I mean, we have to have goals set by August 31st.
so I think what we need to determine now is the issue there's not a standard, of the 3 standards, there's not one that you feel should be there? Or is the issue for example, standard 8 is ethical and inclusive leadership, and I can't remember, you picked 8B or something, I think, was it B? Yes.
Yeah.
So is the issue with the standard or the 8B, I think they're called elements, right?
Right.
So,
Or is it the goal?
because what we yeah, I think that's, to me, I'm trying to struggle, is the standard not addressed that you think needs to be addressed? That's one issue. Because what we used to do, there were 6 standards, and I provided some evidence for maybe a couple of the elements within that standard, but the thinking was throughout the year, there were things that happened that covered 8A, 8B, 8C,
There are
8.
other areas of
Other area, yeah.
responsibility.
So I guess, to me, I think we gotta identify is that, and not even think about, well, I would write the goal a little bit differently, because we could all agree that, let's say, standard 8 is the goal that we all wanna have, and then we said, all 8 of us write a goal that addresses 8, we would probably have 8 different ways of writing that goal. So is the issue the writing of the goal? Is the issue you don't feel they have the right standards or the right elements? I think that would be helpful if we could identify where the issue arises.
And I guess the other piece that I had a question about.
Well, see, if I may, so we reach these points of where there are questions asked and not necessarily decisions should be made, but comments should be made specific to the thing we're talking about, then we move. And this is no reflection on you, Kathy, okay, so please don't. But, so this is how we end up ending a meeting and then reflecting on the meeting and having different recalls of what occurred or what was agreed to or not agreed to. So if I could just revisit what Mike said. So is the problem with the goals, the standards? I mean, what's the, or the fact that I heard, well, we didn't have opportunity for input. Now, if that's the issue, we'll own that. Okay, I mean, if that's what someone is looking to hear, not someone, but if that needs to be communicated, we were not intentional in suggesting or offering opportunity for input, then as board chair, I'll assume that responsibility, though Deborah said, and I would agree, when board docs, when something is live, we have historically operated under the belief you have a concern, you forward it to, now, caveat, Kathy, you'll appreciate this. Not every concern necessarily do we respond to on a timely or efficient or at all on those rare occasions. But we are maybe communicating now. Please, whenever anything, especially processes like this, that's your opportunity to provide that input and advance up.
But to what end would that have been? If I then submitted a list of goals that I think should be focused on, the committee wasn't gonna meet on the weekend and come back with a whole different list of things.
I think
I'm
I
talking
think I
about the
would have
overall
felt.
process.
I-
Thank you. I'm talking about the overall process. I'm expressing a displeasure with a new tool and time frame and recommended going forward. And I think we're all talking about two different things. I'm talking about how I think that the board should work together to create the content versus the tool and the framework. And I think we're bouncing back and forth between the two issues so that we're getting confused about what it is we're talking about. So I'm still talking about the process. I could see improvements for the process next year, and I just want to go on the record saying I hope we don't roll into this and saying, well, this is how we did it last year and it was fine, because to me it's not, and I think it deserves a different discussion.
Okay.
I'm putting that piece aside and picking up the current piece, which is we have a document with content. It seems to me nearly impossible to go back and do the ideal process with everybody's input the way that I'm expressing displeasure with, and I never asked to revisit that. I am not dissatisfied with the list
Okay.
of items. I think they're all worthy goals. Would they be the ones that I would have advocated for choosing in the way that I would like to see them addressed? No, maybe not, but I'm not objecting to them. And so I hear Deborah saying, what about this do you not like? And what I'm saying is, what I don't like about it is that I would feel a lot more comfortable with the content had we had a little bit of a discussion or any kind of a strategic planning discussion or anything up to this point. I realize none of that has happened. I realize we're on a timeline. I'm, fine with all that. I'm just saying, let's not say, well, this is how we did it last year, so let's do it that way next year too. We have a deadline, we have a document, a lot of good work has gone into it. They're all laudable goals, to use the word. And I'm just saying, can we agree that maybe the process could be a little less hurried and a little bit more intentional next year? And then can we say, does anybody want any changes to the document that's been given to us? Because I haven't felt like we're even to that point yet where we can discuss alternate goals. But I'm stuck on this whole, well, why didn't you send in an email when it came out on Friday? Because I don't see how that was gonna change the document that we were considering tonight.
So how would you prefer the process to happen? We just say, how would someone get a goal? How would you do? Explain to me the
Sure.
perfect process for
So
this.
the perfect process, I think we would have, as a 7-person board of the 7 individuals who are on the board now, would at some point have the whole strategic planning discussion. Where is our district going? What are we doing well? What do we need to work on? How are
Okay,
we
can I
gonna
stop
get
you there just for a second?
Yes,
The role of a board is at the three goals, which you all approved. How that happens is not your role. I'm sorry. That is the role of us to get the goals. You're to establish them and to hold us accountable to those, not how we get there. So what we're going to share with you the second week of August is how we're going to get there. That is not your role. And I know I'm honest, I know that's a challenge for you, but it is not your role.
Well, the
So the
strategic
fact that you
planning-
need that piece in order to determine goals doesn't make sense to me, because that's not your job as a school board member.
Strategic planning, setting the direction of the district is important, but in order to be able to evaluate, are we being effective of this, we need to have a discussion such as, this is what we want our district to achieve, and are we achieving that? If not, what needs to be changed? I'm not talking about micromanaging or day-to-day activities. But I do think having goals and examining with some data, which I haven't seen a whole lot of, here's evidence of are we achieving this or are we falling short on this? That, to me, all seems like school board responsibility and is what I have seen over my years of watching. It's changed in flavor, but the essential planning process should be the same. The planning process should be we need to reflect the goals of our community, the priorities of our community, and what a good education for our kids is. And then we need to say, how are we going to measure that? And then we need to look at the measurements, say, are we doing it? And then it's a feedback cycle. Then we say, okay, we're falling short on this. We're not doing what we need to do. What do we need to adjust in order to improve this again? So until we've completed that cycle once, it's very difficult to do something like making specific recommendations for your areas of focus over the next year for your professional goals. And so that's all I'm saying. So in my perfect world, to answer your original question, we'd have had that discussion first. What is the priorities of our community? What do we need to ensure happens for our kids? What's best for our kids, and is it happening? Then once we've had that discussion, then we can say, okay, we are falling short in this, here are the things we need to move forward to, and I would like to see that incorporated into the superintendent's goals.
We did that. You weren't on the board when that happened.
Right.
The graduate profile is what our community told us they want our kids to have.
And what
The 3
measures-
goals were determined by the board, approved by the board. How we get at those goals is not a school board's responsibility.
How about how we're measuring those goals?
When we bring how we're gonna measure it, and if you're saying this doesn't give me the outcomes that I think I want, then you provide a suggestion. But back to a previous meeting, you made a statement about until you see, you didn't want to approve the professional development contract with Daggett's organization. That is not, you approved a budget that's within the budget. That is how we are going to train people to get at those 3 big goals, which is your area of responsibility, not how we do day-to-day things to get to those.
But the evaluation piece does come into what the board should be doing.
Yeah.
If we are putting money towards something, and because we've been working with Daggett, it would be nice to see what the results of that have been, some sort of evidence of success or moving in the right direction before we then approve additional money to go in that direction. I think we're on the same page. I think maybe we're just not really close to each other where setting direction and how, a high level how versus a low level how. But maybe that's a discussion for a different time.
So, Melissa, are you saying that you're okay for now, instead of moving forward with?
I am, as long as everybody has heard me, because I've said it 10 times now, that says, can we look at a less rushed
So your recommendation is
project?
for next year, we start
Yeah, I
at a
just want to
different
go on the
place.
record saying, let's
I
improve
would
the
propose
process
that
of
you
how
lead it next year.
I'm sorry,
I propose that you lead the subcommittee next year.
I wasn't asked to join this committee, so I would prefer to have a little bit more experience before I lead an effort.
I think it's also good to recognize that the strategic plan work wasn't completed. I mean, your timeline for completing the strategic plan work this time didn't fall into our timeline for having to have this done this year. Whereas next year, we'll have the strategic plan, so we'll have plenty of lead time before the June, July timeline of having to have this done.
I mean, not that I want to be here all night, but you're, as I've said before, I know you have your strategic plan, but the standards that are there, I think there's 8 of them. Is there 10 of them? 10 of them. That
Their job, just their job duty.
their job, yeah,
Yes.
it's not just a strategic plan. It's, so the fact that, and you have, even though you weren't on the board, the full 18-19 school year, you have that information from 18-19 to set, kind of what Kathy's saying, to determine what the goals be for this coming year. Now, when we're a year from now, you'll have results of the 19-20 that will help you set the next year's goals, and I think that's kind of what you're saying. Yeah.
Kind of, plus just tying this into
Yeah.
the larger
Yeah.
picture of strategic planning, reflecting our community's priorities and what truly is the job of this.
And I said it earlier, I think had the committee come with just a blank form, my experience has been working with boards is you can't bring a blank form because you just
Yep, I
you
get
just
that.
spin your wheels forever and you get nothing done. So
I get that.
I appreciate they came with samples and the fact that they really put the time and effort to try to connect those to the 3 universal goals. I think it just made sense to me. I don't know.
Well, and, oh, sorry.
Director Workman, Marvin.
So I have a suggestion. First of all, if anybody has any really particular objection to the 3 goals that have been used as an example, I think the goals are good. I wouldn't care to have to spend a whole lot of time trying to improve them, because I think what we have here, it doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be good enough. And I think these goals are good, but what I would like to hear from Mike is, where are you with the 3 example goals that the committee brought forward?
Well, I like the fact that they're connected to standards, and I like the fact that the standards chosen specifically tied into the universal goals. As I've said at the last study session, you still need, if there's concerns in one of the other areas, standards that isn't addressed in these 3 goals, there has to be feedback. And then back to what you said earlier, Julie, you don't have to wait to the end of the year to bring that up.
So in any of your other standards of performance, if we have any issues throughout the year, bring it up, even if it's
Well, I
not in
think-
this document.
Right, and I think when we ever get back to the protocol things, then we need to establish how would that be brought forward, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Director
Yeah.
even
Marvin.
if it's just a question.
yeah, because I wouldn't want you to totally ignore the other standards, because they're all important in order for a superintendent to be effective.
But that 1 versus 7 question.
Director Marvin has been.
So what I hear Mike saying is that if he starts embezzling money, even though it's not one of the goals, he can still get into that. And I think it's important for us to remember to forget the embezzlement thing. That all of these begin with provide leadership. So what we're evaluating is Mike's leadership. Now, if one of our goals is that all of our basketball teams are going to be award-winning, and if they're not, but if we see that Mike's doing his darndest to make sure that we get the best we can get, he's doing a good job of leadership, but we may not win any games, especially cheering for Nebraska.
I love how you phrased that. That was helpful.
Is it laudable?
There was a question
No, the
about,
first part.
about whether or not there were any standards that you didn't see. Standard 3, communication and community relationships, and I don't know if we need to turn that necessarily into a goal, but actually into a study session, because we have this document that was given to us in January of 2018, which was the communication audit, and I would really like to hear what's been done with the recommendations in here, not that you've done them all, and what do you plan to do moving forward?
Yeah, we gave you an update once already, but if you want another one, we could be happy to do that.
And are there copies of that available?
I have some.
We'll make some available to the new board members and any other board member who would so desire. Mark is waving his hand. Maybe you could make them available to all of us. Electronic e-version
It
would be.
used to be on the website,
Yeah.
I'm not sure it is now.
I'll ask him.
Okay.
So how are we gonna get feedback on?
Well, is there additional feedback? It seems like the most significant feedback of great value, Melissa, and you're absolutely right. This is an ongoing process of superintendent's evaluation, and we thought this was a great time to try to take it on, but come to find out as we've had this discussion, we could have probably built in more time, before we got to where we are. We didn't have that, so we moved forward with the time frame we did have, especially tied to contract language. So we didn't have a lot of latitude, okay? If there's a reason, well, why do we do this? Well, contract obligation, okay? So, but it sounded like, and maybe we are in agreement with Melissa, and we can each stand on our own merit. Process, okay, content, no real problem. And maybe that's where we are, okay? Does anyone have any, are you okay with the process that was utilized, the content, okay? The tool, the goals. I'm sorry?
We're going to talk content now. the goals.
Well, I'm just asking, are you okay with what's been submitted as a draft? Okay, and it was Kathy who said, well, what about any mechanism to provide additional input? Can you scroll back to your goals for this evening that you,
I will say something that maybe might help
okay.
here. I know there's a concern about being pushed, that August 31st deadline. I mean, if we don't get them established till the end of September, it's not the end of the world. I mean, it's not like, oh, I'm gonna be working on all of those standards. I mean, that's, as a superintendent.
None of this is new to you.
Right, so if you truly want to wait till after the second August meeting when the strategic plan's presented, or the action steps are presented, I mean, the sky's not going to fall if we don't get this done until end of September, first part of October. I mean,
But I think we have to be really careful about that. because
well, no, I mean, it can't go on forever,
Yeah,
but,
exactly.
I mean, it's not gonna hold me up, because I'm gonna be doing all 10 every day. I mean, that's what you have to do, so it's not like, you know, I'm chomping at the bit to get the goals and get rolling. I mean, if they're connected to the standards, I'm gonna be doing them anyway.
I guess what I would like to take a closer look at, I like the goals, is the standards that are underneath them. I'm not saying that they're good or they're bad, or you should include something else or not. Personally, I would like to just have a little bit more time, since I only got this on Friday, to actually look through those other standards and just contemplate whether or not another standard might be better or might not be better. I'm not saying that what you chose isn't great, and maybe I would come to that same conclusion, but I haven't had the opportunity really to dig in and do that. Because I had no idea where this meeting was.
Would it be useful then if we made the list of standards and their descriptions available to everybody, and sometime in the next week or 10 days or
Yeah, I
I
whatever?
just posted that out on Board Docs.
Pardon?
I just posted that document out on Board
Yeah.
Docs.
You're amazing. That you get back to Kathy.
Thanks.
Kathy, huh?
Well, she's got the PowerPoint.
She's been on
Right.
vacation, man. She
And
deserves
that
some
means
if
she's
work.
that's the
charge.
process, which is a great suggestion, I would ask that let's all use this
This being,
document, this template, the language, the standards and the numbers, so that and if there's a modification to the language under this, like we even modified a few words just to make it clear. If there's a modification to the language, make that clear too, because that'll help.
Melissa,
So on the PowerPoint, it says elements of a comprehensive superintendent evaluation. The criteria should be legal, realistic, accurate, useful, and measurable. It seems an attempt has been made to find ways to measure some of these things. Is the committee feeling comfortable that everything is measurable?
No,
No.
I
And-
had a lot of questions on that.
Then the second question is, well, then it's the third question. The second question would be, how do we make it measurable? What's the committee's plan for that? And number three, if it's supposed to be legal, are we gonna be running this by legal to make sure that it's legal?
Well, I think that Mike would probably know that.
Yeah, we don't.
As a
want you to do
first pass,
anything
right?
illegal, Mike.
If we wanted individual student data by individual student name, that would
But
not
to-
be legal.
But whether or not it's legal to hold him to those kinds of performance goals, I'm just asking. It says it should be legal, so I'm asking the legal
Well,
question.
I'm thinking if it's, here, it's probably legal.
Well, but the performance standards.
Okay, so
The measurements.
what I'm thinking is that if Kathy can get feedback and tweaks and send it out, so this is what we've got now, then our next meeting, that's when we sort of finalize the performance pieces. So how are we gonna measure that? What's that gonna look like? And Mike, I think you should have a lot of feedback to that, and maybe we'll have 1, 2, or 3, or 4 different ways we can provide.
Because that will be an
Evidence.
interesting discussion.
I hate to put this burden on Kathy.
Good.
yeah,
I feel good about
You
it.
look like, I don't see a whole lot of burdens on you right now, so I think you.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it would be worthwhile to, when you get suggestions, to say, well, gosh, we had 3 suggestions on this particular thing, so we can focus on that one more, or, gosh, I only had 1 suggestion on this, so we're gonna throw it out? Is that the kind of thing the committee would do, or is that the kind of thing the whole board would do? I'm looking at Melissa because this
Because I'm the
is-
one most likely to object.
I think whatever, I'm not gonna speak for the rest of the committee, because just because I'm getting the email doesn't mean you're not involved in the conversation. I think whatever feedback we have to bring it all to the table.
Sure.
And I could perhaps come up with some creative color coding, who knows? We'll see what we get.
And I appreciate your question, because the advantage of having a conversation is that one person might raise something that none of the other 6 have thought about yet, and once they had a chance to consider it,
You know,
they
and I
saw
mean,
the
I think
wisdom
we have,
of
I
it.
think we have to be really careful about that one person thing, because I know Mike really does not wanna see, you didn't thank the people who didn't vote for the referendum, you know?
But there's a difference
Yeah.
between one person giving their input and having the other 6 consider it and discard it, versus the one person having their input and the other 6 say, I hadn't thought of that, that's a really important aspect.
Well, that's a true statement.
Well, you could use the consensus process we use with the core planning team. If you bring up a suggestion for a change and rationale for, then it's your responsibility to convince everybody else that that change needs to happen. But it gives you an opportunity to make a suggestion, and here's why I'm making that suggestion.
Right.
Yeah.
And then other people can either
Right.
speak up or
Right.
say,
And if we're giving input, I don't think it should just be on the standards and the elements, but I think we need some input on any language on the goals or any other either questions on the evidence of performance or suggestions, because the document does not have samples of goals. That's the one thing where we had to come up with it ourselves, but it does have probably 4 pages of examples of evidence of performance. So if there's another evidence of performance in the chart that you think is a better example related to the goal, suggest it, or if it's a previous report we've seen the board do or something, let's put those on the table too, because some of those, Mike, you might say, that's a better one because it's more accessible than the other one. So let's not limit ourselves.
I would also suggest at our next meeting that we don't even entertain discussion about the, what do you call that, 3rd section? Performance, evidence of performance until you come to consensus on the goals and standards, and then
Yes,
well, and I would
jump
go-
into that
in
after.
order.
I would go so far as to say, I think if we're planning to make substantive changes to the goals, we should give everybody a heads up now, because we can't go into a meeting on the 27th and start over fresh. I'm not planning to make huge suggestions to the changing of the goals from what I've seen so far. I might clarify language or add a subtopic, but is that reasonable to say that would really throw a wrench into it, to be changing the goals at this point?
I don't know that anybody can say that unless they've gone through the process that Deborah and Jean and I did when you go through all the standards, because the standards motivated the goals for us. So we picked the standards language and the elements before we ever wrote the goal language. So I don't know that if you haven't gone through that process, you can commit to not saying, I have a better goal.
Is it
Okay.
possible that we can sort of agree on the content of this tool with the exception of the performance piece before we meet again? I'm just listening to this, and with all due respect to everybody, it's not like we're curing cancer. You know, we come up with the tool that's pretty good, and one way or the other, it's an evaluation tool for the superintendent. That's it. And I think we could spend weeks on this, and it wouldn't make the tool any better, it wouldn't make the superintendent any, I mean, you can't improve on perfection than he already is. So I'm just thinking.
Remember that when you're filling out the
Yeah,
form.
okay, let's put that at the top. But it's sort of like picking a paint color for the inside of your house. You could spend weeks,
I
different
did.
shades, well, that's the thing,
I had
different
swatches
shades
on
of
the wall
blue, and at
for
the
years.
end of the day, it's still gonna be blue. Not that I've ever done that. So I'm just thinking from my perspective, I hope we can keep this in perspective. It's not the most important thing this board does. Evaluating the superintendent's critically important, but the exact tool we use is not. You know, it may be the conversations we have during the year with him. It may be so many other things besides just this one document.
And it is the first time we've done it this way. So we're gonna make mistakes.
So where are we landing then?
So what I heard is I'm getting emails.
Just a second, let's
Thank
do
you so
this.
much, Kathy, for that.
Let's have Wendy kind of, because I want to make sure that what you heard is what she heard.
Write it down. Oh, okay. I'm ready. Okay.
Okay,
I'm ready.
okay, go ahead and say what you heard.
I am to receive emails from other board members after they have reviewed the resources available in the goals and standards-based superintendent evaluation document on standards and elements that they may feel are better reflective of our priorities for the superintendent's evaluation. I'm expecting if anybody has comments on the goal language as it is drafted, they'll send that in. And if there are new goals, they will send those in. And if anybody has questions or suggestions on evidence, that they are going to send those as well.
No,
Date?
they're gonna call Jean.
By
Oh,
what
you know, I'm
date?
busy that night, but.
Didn't we agree to a date?
Are we gonna have this conversation at the next study session?
On
We're gonna
August
use,
27th.
we're gonna use whatever feedback I get at the next, whatever feedback we get at the next study session.
But we
right?
wanted board members to get this information to you
Right.
by a certain time
Right, that's
frame.
what
Did
I'm
we
looking
want to
for. So what's the
establish
date?
So the next study session is the end of August, right?
August 27th, yep.
Okay, so, do you think you can have it to me by the 19th of August? So that I can get it in to Wendy for board docs by the 23rd?
Well, I was gonna say earlier, because if there's gonna be a whole lot of input that might radically change things, we'd wanna know that.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not saying that I'm going to radically change things.
But you're not saying you aren't.
But actually, I'm saying I'm not.
That's
Just
a
allow for the possibility that that
I've
could
got
happen.
some-
How
Somebody
about
might.
the 12th of August?
How about tomorrow?
Okay, the 12th.
I
The
mean,
12th?
7 to 10 days
Okay.
is plenty.
Well, today's, what's today, the 23rd? 12th, that's 20 days, it's almost 3 weeks.
I mean, that's almost too much, because
then-
that doesn't allow us to react.
And then, may I ask Director Nathan a question? Would you like to have all of our feedback at once? Or is it okay if we send it to you in bits and spurts? Like, here's my goal one stuff, and then I send it to you. And then 4 days later, I send you goal 2 and so on, or do you want it all at once?
As long as you have compiled your
Right.
thoughts by August 12th in their
There you go.
entirety, I can manage smaller bursts of data versus large streams of
Just
terabytes.
finish all your sentences when you,
Yeah.
that's
So
what
I
I
can finally
Did you like
relate
that?
to what you're saying.
Right? There you go. I did that for you.
Okay.
And then is the notion that Deborah and Jean and I will meet to discuss the input so that I'm not making decisions on what to bring forth by myself?
That would be reasonable.
Okay. Or how to present it.
So
I'm
there's-
not making any decisions on how
So
to.
there's some, so the committee's gonna make some decisions about not bringing things forth.
No, we're gonna
you
make
just said,
decisions about how to compile
Okay,
and
talking about the
format.
how, not the what. You're gonna bring everything forward that
That's
comes in
my
from
intent.
board members. Okay,
Yes.
just wanted to make that clear.
So would I
As
be
long as
able
they're in complete sentences.
to submit that perhaps you don't have to meet in person if there aren't a lot of substantive
Well,
changes?
we'll figure that out.
That's what I'm saying, I just
Yeah.
don't want you to commit to meeting in person when an
We'll figure it
in-person meeting is necessary.
I don't care how many.
That's what I'm saying too. I trust the
Okay.
systems to get it
I
done.
trust them to do whatever.
So, was there anything else for tonight?
No.
Let me hurry up and say, meeting adjourned 8:06.
Wait, I'm teasing you.
Okay.
Come on.
Meeting adjourned 8:06. Thank you.